Welcome back to MHS, Midnight Horror Stories. I know that many of you use these videos to help you fall asleep. So before we get started, I just want to ask you for a small but meaningful favor to help the show continue and grow. Please leave a little interaction for the video, a like, comment, share, or simply turn on the video and leave it there and relax. Such actions will help YouTube appreciate the content and spread the show to more people. Thank you for spending your time here and for your love for the show and our team. Your support is really a great motivation for us to continue creating more attractive content. Now, let's begin tonight's horror stories. I'm cleaning my new house with Buddy, my dog, just like any other day. My eyes happen to land on the wall calendar. July 4th, 2025 is fast approaching, and for a moment, a vague sense of dread rises within me, pulling me back to the memories of July 4th last year, a day I'll never forget. The evening of July 4th in Cedar Creek, Texas, always followed a familiar routine. Independence Day celebrations at the town park starting at 6 p.m., followed by fireworks at 8 p.m. I've lived in this small town for 10 years. Fireworks exploded in the sky like giant fiery flowers. I sat on a wooden bench near the playground, observing familiar faces in the sparkling light. Kids ran around with small flags in their hands. I still bring Buddy here every year. My buddy is so afraid of fireworks that every boom makes him jump and cower. But aside from the fireworks, he loves all the other activities. I stroked Buddy's head, trying to reassure him. "It's okay, Buddy, just a little longer." But the fireworks had only just begun. The high school marching band had just finished their performance, a show filled with off-key trumpets and uneven steps. The tuba player was a big, heavy man in a dark red uniform. The uniform was soaking wet and too tight for his body. I remembered seeing him stumble and fall during the midday parade. The heavy tuba rolled down the street, and everyone around burst out laughing. I laughed too, and he looked directly at me at that moment. While watching the fireworks, I coincidentally saw him again. Even though we were dozens of yards apart, I still felt that cold, strange gaze. I looked at my watch. The fireworks were far from over, but Buddy couldn't take it anymore. We left the park and walked home. Most of the neighbors were still at the park. There was only the distant boom of fireworks and the click-clack of Buddy's paws on the sidewalk. As I was opening the gate, I heard steady footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw the tuba player walking toward me. He was still wearing the dark red uniform, his eyes fixed on me. He stopped in front of my gate. He didn't say anything, just stood there staring. Sweat still beaded on his forehead, even though the air had cooled. I nudged Buddy into the yard. He let out a low growl, the fur on his neck standing on end. 25 years. The man suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse. I tried to stay calm. "Excuse me? 25 years I've played the tuba in this band. No one has ever dared to laugh at me." He stepped closer, his hand gripping the gate's iron bars. The streetlights illuminated his face, casting deep shadows under his eye sockets. I could clearly see every bead of sweat, every angry wrinkle. "I'm sorry about earlier today. I didn't mean to. Do you know what it feels like to be laughed at by the whole town?" He interrupted me, his voice trembling with anger. "Do you know what it feels like when your life's passion becomes a joke?" Buddy growled louder as the man raised his voice. I tightened my grip on Buddy's leash, unsure how to respond. He let go of the bars and stepped closer. I smelled sweat. He stared intensely at me. "This day, next year, you'll understand that feeling." I turned and ran toward the house door. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, pushed Buddy inside, and slammed the door shut. The click of the lock made me feel a little safer. I turned off the lights inside the house and peeked through the curtain crack. The man was still standing there, facing my house. 10 minutes passed, and he was still there. Then he walked up onto the porch. The sound of his shoes on the wooden planks made my heart pound like a drum. Buddy hid under the coffee table, breathing heavily. I heard his footsteps moving around the house, from the front door, past the side windows, then to the backyard. He was checking all the entry points. Finally, he returned to the living room window. I saw his dark silhouette through the thin curtain. He pressed his face against the glass, his breath creating foggy circles on the window. "I know you're in there." His voice was low, seeping through the glass like a sinister whisper. "You can hide today, but next year, on this day." He paused, leaving a terrifying silence. "You won't be able to hide anymore." I heard his footsteps descend from the porch. I waited another 10 minutes before daring to look outside. The street was empty. He had vanished. But on the window glass, faint traces of his breath lingered. I didn't dare turn off the lights all night. Buddy lay beside me on the sofa, his eyes alert, staring toward the door. The fireworks had long stopped, but their echo still lingered in my mind, along with his words. Soon after that incident, Buddy and I decided to leave town and find a new place to live. That's how we ended up in this house. I truly hoped never to see that man again, but his words still haunt me endlessly. Will he really come back, or was it all just an empty threat? I wanted Martin gone, but I never expected it to actually happen right before my eyes, amidst the bright fireworks. I'm Danny, a high school student. I remember every detail of that fateful day. I was walking along a forest path, my sneakers, which I usually kept spotless, covered in mud. Sweat trickled down my neck. It wasn't because of the hot Ohio June weather, but because I had just run away from Martin for the third time this week. Martin was a classmate, almost a head taller than me. He always found ways to make my life miserable, knocking my books to the floor, shoving me into lockers, or just blocking my way. Today, Martin chased me from class all the way to the parking lot, yelling curses. If he caught me, I was sure to get a few more bruises. This path led to my house. Nobody knew about it except a few kids in the neighborhood. Once I was sure I'd run far enough, I breathed a sigh of relief and slowed to a walk. With each heavy step, I felt truly helpless about myself and my current situation. Why was I Martin's target? Why was I so weak? Suddenly, a sound echoed, and I stopped to listen. Leaves rustled, as if someone was moving around. I turned toward the sound. A woman sat at the base of a large oak tree. She wore a long, dirty brown sweater, her tangled gray hair obscuring part of her face. A faint stench wafted towards me. She stared at me, her voice hoarse as if she hadn't had water in a long time. "I know how to deal with bullies." I didn't answer, my expression blank. She chuckled softly. "This 4th of July, bring that kid to Scioto Mile, under the Main Street Bridge. 9 p.m. I will free you." I shivered slightly, still staring blankly at the woman. "Remember that, Danny Miller?" I gasped. I had never told her my name. I quickly turned and ran home. The woman's laughter echoed behind me. I didn't dare look back. I didn't tell anyone and tried to forget about the strange encounter. I thought the woman must be homeless and have mental health issues. The next week, my life went on as usual. Martin continued to torment me. Until Friday afternoon when I was sitting at lunch with Sarah, a girl I'd been trying to impress since the beginning of the school year. Suddenly, Martin appeared, snatched my sandwich from my hand and threw it on the ground. He stomped on it, then grabbed my shirt and pulled me to my feet. "Hey, Sarah, you know this guy pees his pants in gym class?" I saw him crying like a baby. Martin laughed loudly, his voice echoing through the cafeteria, making everyone turn and stare. "Martin!" I tried to pull away, but he held on tighter. He shoved me hard, sending me crashing into the chair, knocking over my entire food tray onto the ground. Food and drinks splattered all over my shirt. Sarah looked at me with disappointment, then turned and walked away. My face burned with shame. All around, the entire cafeteria was looking at me and giggling, some even recording with their phones. In that moment, a rage ignited within me, and I swore to myself that Martin would pay for everything he had done. That evening, I was home alone. I thought about the woman in the woods, about her strange promise. The humiliating scene from that morning flashed in my mind, along with those two words, "Free you." The next day, I walked out to the parking lot after school. Martin was there, laughing and talking with his friends. He saw me and called out loudly. Laughter from Martin's group of friends echoed. My face felt hot. Martin walked closer and shoved my shoulder. That's when I saw Sarah walking out of class. She stopped and looked toward us. "I'm gonna make you pay." Martin laughed loudly. "What did you say?" July 4th, Kyoto Mile, under the Main Street Bridge. 9 p.m. You brave enough to show up? Martin's eyes lit up. "You'll regret this." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. July 4th arrived faster than I thought. All day I felt antsy. I didn't know if that woman would really appear, or if it was just a crazy hallucination. That evening, I told my parents I was going to watch fireworks with a friend. Kyoto Mile was crowded with families celebrating Independence Day. The smell of barbecue and cotton candy filled the air. I walked to the underpass. This was a less frequented area. Martin was already waiting, looking very smug. As soon as he saw me, Martin lunged, grabbed my shirt, and repeatedly punched me in the stomach while yelling curses. I bent over, gasping for air. The first firework exploded in the sky, its red light illuminating the water below. "Hello, Danny." The woman's voice rang out, catching both our attention. She approached with a wide smile, her eyes unsettlingly wide. Martin let go of me, his expression blank. He turned and ran. But the woman lunged with incredible speed. One hand grabbed Martin's neck, lifting him off the ground. Her strength was inhuman. "No! Let me go! Help me!" Martin screamed, his voice trembling with fear, his legs flailing wildly in the air. Fireworks boomed overhead, drowning out Martin's desperate cries for help. "Danny wants to be free," the woman said, then turned to look at me. "Isn't that right?" In that moment, it was like I suddenly woke up. "Don't! I don't want this. I was wrong." But it was too late. The woman laughed loudly. Martin's screaming stopped. His struggles grew weaker. I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my head with both hands, not daring to look at what was about to happen. I heard a horrifying tearing sound, something wet splattering, and the coppery smell of blood filled the air. When I opened my eyes, I was alone on the bridge. Martin and the woman were gone. On the ground were dark stains, and a torn piece of Martin's t-shirt lay nearby. "No, what have I done? What is this?" I whispered, my voice lost. Suddenly, a loud firework exploded. I flinched, jumping up and screaming. It turned out to be fireworks outside the window. My heart pounded. Cold sweat drenched my pajamas. I looked around my familiar room, the light from the digital clock showing 11:30 p.m. It was just a dream. It was all a terrifying nightmare. I breathed a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from my forehead. But the dream felt strangely real. I still remembered every detail. I shook my head, trying to shake off those horrifying images. It must be because I was so obsessed with Martin's bullying that I had such bizarre dreams. The next morning, as I walked into class, I subconsciously looked for Martin's familiar figure. But his seat was empty. The second day passed, and Martin still didn't show up. The third and fourth day, same thing. His seat remained empty. The teacher announced that Martin had gone missing on 4th of July night, and his family and the police were actively searching for him. In those days, I started to feel uneasy. The images from my dream kept coming back. Did something really happen to Martin? Did that strange woman in the woods truly exist? I didn't dare ask anyone about Martin, partly out of fear that people would suspect me, and partly because deep down, I felt both guilty and relieved. Even if it was just in a dream, I had wished Martin would disappear. And now, that wish seemed to have come true. Those nights that followed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The question kept haunting me. Did Martin really pay the price for his violent actions? And that mysterious woman in my dream, was it she who freed me as she promised? I'm Lori, and I live with my parents and younger brother in Millfield, Ohio. That night was the 4th of July. I was sitting on the sofa flipping through TV channels when the first firework exploded. Lori, can I have some hot chocolate? My brother Josh called from the kitchen. Hot chocolate in July, are you sure? I chuckled softly, but still got up to make it for him. I was 18 and used to taking care of Josh when my parents were out. My parents had gone to Akron to visit Aunt Margaret because she broke her leg. They'd be back late, probably after midnight. Before they left, Mom had repeatedly told me, lock the doors securely, don't open for anyone, and call me right away if anything happens. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge for milk. I looked out the window. The neighbors' houses were lit up, and the sounds of families laughing and watching fireworks drifted in. Lori, someone's in the backyard. Josh's voice suddenly turned serious. I turned to see Josh standing by the living room window, the curtain pulled back just a crack. It's probably Mr. Henderson watering his plants. I poured milk into the pot. It's not Mr. Henderson. They're wearing a white lab coat, like a doctor. I turned off the stove and walked to the window. Josh stepped back, his face pale. I looked out. In the dim light from the porch lamp, I saw a figure standing by the fence, their back to me. The man was tall and thin, wearing a white lab coat and black pants. He stood silently, as if observing something. It's probably a doctor from the hospital. Maybe someone got hurt by fireworks. I offered a logical explanation, but my heart started pounding faster. The man turned around. His face was pale, his dark eyes staring directly at the window. He smiled stiffly. Lori, I know you're in there. His voice echoed through the glass. I flinched, pulling Josh away from the window. The man stepped closer. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone, but my hand shook too hard and it fell to the ground. Lori, I don't want to hurt you. He was now right at the door, placing his hand on the glass. You wish you could be a better sister, right, Lori? Josh suddenly burst into tears. What is he talking about, Lori? I hugged him tight, my brain spinning, trying to make sense of it. Why would he know that? Suddenly, a loud crash of breaking glass. The man had smashed the kitchen window. He reached in, unlocked it, and climbed into the house. Run! I pulled Josh upstairs, my heart pounding like a drum. We ran into my parents' room. I locked the door. Lori, don't run anymore. I just want to help. His footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and steady. He wasn't rushing, as if he knew we couldn't escape. Josh trembled in my arms. Lori, I'm scared. I don't want to die. You won't die. I'll protect you. I looked around the room for something to defend myself with. In my mom's dresser drawer was a box cutter. I grabbed it, the small blade trembling in my hand. Lori, do you remember the day it happened? The day the stray bullet flew into the playground? The man's voice now sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. You witnessed Josh die right there. No, I screamed. Josh is still here. He's alive. The man's voice echoed through the wooden door. Lori, you've been living in an illusion for the past 5 years. Josh has been dead for a long time. I looked down at Josh in my arms. He was still trembling, still breathing, still warm. That's not true. Josh is still here. The door opened even though I had locked it securely. The man stepped in. Lori, it's time you face the truth. He reached out to us. I swung the small knife, trying to protect Josh, but when I looked down, my arms were empty. Josh was gone. Light suddenly flooded the room. My mom's voice echoed from downstairs. Lori! We're home. I blinked. The man had vanished. I was sitting alone in my parents' room, the knife stuck in the wooden wall. My parents ran up, their faces full of worry. Lori, what are you doing here? Why are you holding a knife? I looked around the room, searching. Where's Josh? Where is Josh? Mom knelt beside me and burst into tears. Lori, Josh passed away 5 years ago. I stared at my parents in shock. Memories of that day flooded back. Josh lying in a pool of blood on the playground, the sirens and screams. I held him in my arms, begging him not to die, but it was too late. No, Josh is alive. I just talked to him. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. Lori, we're taking you back to the hospital. Dr. Peter will help you. I sat there trembling. In the corner of the room, I still saw the shadow of the man in the white lab coat. So he was my doctor. But I knew very well that no matter how much medication I took or how many doctors I saw, the terrifying feeling and the pain of losing Josh would always stay with me. Outside the window, fireworks still bloomed in the Ohio summer night sky. But for me, summer had ended a long time ago.
Four years back in the fall, my girlfriend Louisa and I went on a road trip across the state to celebrate hitting 2 years together. We started out in Amarillo, headed southeast through Fort Worth, and ended up in Houston. The last part of the trip was all about chilling and having fun at the Kima Boardwalk, where I was planning to pop the question to Louisa. I was pumped for this trip. After a week of listing stuff, getting everything ready, and sorting out work, we hit the road. The first part of the trip was always a blast, and we were full of energy. We talked, snacked, checked out the streets, and got hyped about the trip. After a few hours, we got into a little argument, and I could tell Louisa was pretty upset. Same here, and I bet other couples do too. But it was all good. We got over that first bump pretty quick. We grabbed some amazing Texas barbecue and kept going when it was almost dark. We headed over to Fort Worth real quick. It's a city that mixes old school and modern vibes. After driving for a bit, I was totally caught off guard when Louisa shouted, "Hey, look!" On the side of the road, this old guy was standing there, waving at us. I didn't slow down or answer Louisa. I just drove right past the guy. "What's up with you, William?" Louisa was pissed at me. "Louisa, he's a total stranger," I pointed out. "He's pitiful and needs help." Louisa's voice kept getting louder at me. "How do you know he's pitiful? There's been so many scams like this lately. You can't just let random people in the car." Louisa went quiet after seeing I wasn't budging, staring out the window. The silence went on for almost 2 hours. Louisa shouted again, "William!" I looked where Louisa was pointing, and there was a man standing on the side of the road. "Stop the car and help him," Louisa pushed. "Isn't that the man we saw like 2 hours ago?" I was doubtful, and Louisa was getting pissed. "Whether it's him or anyone else, we gotta help him." And I still decided to just drive past the guy. Of course, with how Louisa is, she got mad at me. With my girlfriend yelling at me, I just stayed quiet. Arguing right then wasn't gonna help at all. Maybe I made the right call, even though Louisa was still pissed. At least she shut up after a few words. We drove through a busy street and stumbled on this random music festival with a bunch of young people our age. I stopped the car, yanked Louisa out, and jumped into the fun to shake off the awkward vibe. In the noisy crowd, with the music blasting and lights flashing, I spotted the man from earlier, the one we'd seen twice on the highway. But for just a second, the lights went out and then back on, and he was gone. I pulled Louisa away, surprising her, and said I wasn't feeling great and was a bit hungry, just to get us out of there. We stopped at a Buc-ee's. It was like almost midnight. "I'll grab you whatever you want, cool?" Louisa gave a little smile and went inside while I stayed out to pump gas and would head in later. I tried to play it cool in front of Louisa, but in my head, I was feeling all kinds of restless and worried. A ton of questions and thoughts about that weird guy kept popping up in my head. After pumping gas, I went back into the store, looking for Louisa in the fast food section. "Louisa!" I yelled, getting everyone's attention, and marched over to her with a death glare. My girlfriend was talking to that guy. It had to be him in those torn up clothes. But when I got closer, he was totally gone. "Did you just talk to him? What'd he say? You good?" I asked, freaking out. "Come on, William, it's just a homeless man asking for some food." "Please, William, your overprotectiveness is just turning into selfishness and being annoying." Louisa was getting pissed again. I just wanted to look out for her. But then I'm called selfish and annoying. My whole mood was off, and I snapped back. And then the tension between us just blew up right there in the Buc-ee's. "Fine, do whatever you want with that annoying attitude." "I don't need you either, you jerk." She stormed off, and I wasn't about to chase her. It was the dumbest, worst decision of my life. After leaving the store, I looked around, but couldn't spot Louisa. I could hear muffled screams and a car engine in the distance. It was Louisa, getting yanked into the car. I screamed, tried to chase after them, but it was too late. The car was already gone, swallowed by the dark road. I was all fear, panic, and regret in that moment. I called police right away, and the whole investigation was a total nightmare. The Buc-ee's security cam caught the kidnapping that night, but since it was far away, you couldn't really see the kidnapper. I told the police about the weird guy. A week later, they finally caught the kidnapper, hiding out in some old house in the outskirts of the city. That freak, Dominic Novak. He admitted that he overheard me and Louisa talking at the barbecue joint, and that's when he started stalking us. He said he wanted to ruin our happiness and had been planning to snatch Louisa from the start. I couldn't keep it together and just ran straight to punch that crazy guy right at the police station. During the questioning, the guy just sat there all calm, like he didn't feel bad at all. He went on and on, talking about how he followed us and grabbed Louisa. But when police asked him where Louisa was, he just grinned and said, "You'll never find her." Dominic wouldn't say a word. He just kept Louisa's location to himself. The next few days were a total nightmare for me. Not only was I dealing with Louisa disappearing, but I also couldn't shake off the guilt and torment. I spent all my time in cash looking for Louisa, checking out the old streets, asking everyone, but no luck. Even though they never found Louisa, they wrapped up the case, saying she was killed and Dominic got life in prison. It's been 4 years, and I've kind of come to terms with losing Louisa. The engagement ring I always carried with me still reminds me I never got to get down on one knee and put it on her finger.
My wife and I have been married for 7 years. We live in a cozy home in a town near the sea. We happily welcome the birth of our daughter, Anya. She is 5 years old this year. Yesterday, my daughter attended the birthday party of a classmate, a boy named Penn. I took my daughter to her friend's house at 8 p.m. for a party. Penn's mother arranged to come pick up Anya around 10:30 because she wanted to organize a pretty grand party for their son. I'm quite comfortable in my child's extracurricular and social activities. Around 10 o'clock, I left home to pick up my daughter and returned quite late, around 11:20 p.m. As soon as I got the baby home, my wife put Anya to bed, and then she went to sleep, and I watched football in the living room and fell asleep. In my sleep, I heard my daughter whispering to me, "Daddy," then pulling my sleeve. I woke up and she asked, "Dad, guess how old I will be next month?" "I don't know," I replied, half awake. "Are you still not sleeping, baby?" Suddenly, she pulled out 2 fingers from her pocket and lifted them up. And then she added 4 more fingers. "I'm 6 years old, Dad." Her innocent voice made me laugh. I reached out and patted my daughter's head. But then, I immediately realized that something is very, very wrong and looked back. The 2 fingers my daughter was holding were human fingers, and to be more precise, these were the fingers of a child. Hastily snatching 2 fingers from my daughter, I squinted my trembling eyes to look carefully at the objects. Suddenly, the little girl pulled 2 dirty fingers out of her pocket, and then suddenly flashed up 4 more. "I'm 6 years old, Dad," she said. After hearing and seeing everything, my wife panicked and burst into tears, holding our daughter tight. I tried calmly asking our daughter where she got those 2 fingers from. My daughter innocently said they were a gift from the clown at the party. We immediately called Penn's mother to ask about the activities and attendees at the party. She said that a clown came to perform and gave the children different gift boxes, but the gift box her son received was a few candies. My wife and I looked at each other in shock when we heard her say that. We immediately called the police and provided all the information and evidence for the investigation. The next 2 days, my husband and I asked for permission for a short leave, and we also asked to work from home to ensure her absolute safety. After investigating and testing DNA from 2 human fingers, the police revealed the identity of that unfortunate child. It was a boy, 1 year younger than my daughter, and his family reported him missing 2 days ago. It is known that after the boy went missing, the family received a blackmail call from a strange phone number. However, the amount of money was too large. The family did not have time to prepare. They only received one last message that their child had died and completely lost contact with the kidnapper. The search for the boy and the clown expanded and became more intense. A few days later, the body of the boy in distress was found in a remote area near the town, nearly 30 kilometers, but there was no trace of that clown. Checking all the video recordings and photos at Penn's birthday party, the image of that clown was very blurry. Penn's mother said that she and her husband both thought this was a surprise the other had for the children, so they were not on guard. The photos only captured parts of him, such as his arms, shoulders, and hair. With only such images, it is very difficult to confirm his identity and to hunt down the predator. My wife and I are more scared every time we think that the kidnapper has approached our daughter. He showed these 2 fingers to my daughter as a challenge to the police, as well as a chilling warning to my family. Surely that pervert has noticed my family and is still somewhere around here.
I never thought my life would become a real nightmare. My name is Emma Carter, 25 years old, and I work as a server at a high-end restaurant on the outskirts of Chicago. I've always been cautious, especially with men who may have bad intentions. In the past, I've been harassed a few times, but never to the point where I feared for my life. I have big ambitions in the hospitality industry, and I've built a professional LinkedIn profile to seek better opportunities. Everything started very normally. One day, I received a message on LinkedIn from Richard Holloway, the shift manager at the restaurant where I worked. He was 45 years old, married with 2 children, always polite and courteous. The first message was simply career advice, tips on how to develop professionally in the industry. I didn't think much of it and replied politely. But then, the messages started becoming more personal. "You're really a special girl. I think we could be closer. Would you like a little help in your career?" When I read those words for the first time, I felt uncomfortable. The friendliness turned into something over the top. I replied briefly, trying to keep a clear distance. But Richard didn't stop. The messages from him came more frequently, often late at night. "I have a private apartment to relax after work. Would you like to come? My wife doesn't understand me the way you do." A feeling of disgust surged within me. I didn't reply. The encounters at the restaurant became tense every time Richard stared at me with eyes full of hidden meaning. I tried to avoid him, but I couldn't leave this job. Then one day, when I opened the locker in the employee changing room, I froze. A bouquet of bright red roses was neatly placed inside, with no name. Only a small card with scribbled handwriting. For you. Unable to bear it anymore, I decided to block Richard on LinkedIn. But the next morning, I received a friend request from a new account. When I opened it, a message chilled me to the bone. Do you think you can escape from me so easily? I know you still read my messages. I'm always watching you. Fear began to consume my mind. The feeling of being watched grew stronger and stronger. When leaving the restaurant after my shift, I always felt like someone was standing a few steps behind me. One night, I heard footsteps behind me. I walked faster, and the footsteps quickened as well. I ran. When I reached my apartment, I quickly locked the door, my heart pounding, my mind spinning with panic. I couldn't sleep for several nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I had the feeling that someone was standing right next to my bed. I would wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, my heart racing, cold sweat dripping down my face, only to realize that the room was completely empty. But I couldn't convince myself that I was safe. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant in a state of extreme stress. But what awaited me was even worse. On my desk, right in front of me, was a photo of me on my way home with the words, "I was here." I panicked. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. I only received advice to be more careful. Their helplessness only made me more desperate. One time, I confided in Lucas, a close coworker, about being followed. Lucas knew a bit about IT, so I asked him to investigate the LinkedIn account that had been bothering me. Tracing the IP address, Lucas discovered it didn't come from Richard. A cold shiver ran down my spine. If it wasn't Richard, then who was it? I was hoping for some comfort, but Lucas just chuckled and said, "Well, if I were you, I'd make him disappear." I laughed, thinking it was just a joke. That night, I received another video from the fake LinkedIn account. I hesitated for a few seconds, a sense of unease creeping over me. I knew I shouldn't open it, but curiosity mixed with fear made me unable to resist. I opened it, and my heart seemed to stop. In the video, Richard was tied to a wooden chair, his face bruised. A voice echoed from the darkness. "He was following you, but now he's mine." I jumped, dropping the phone onto the bed, struggling to breathe, but the air around me felt suffocating. A chilling sensation crawled up my spine, as though someone was standing right behind me, whispering in my ear. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call the police, but every search effort came up empty. The next day, the restaurant received news. Richard had mysteriously disappeared. Then, I received another message. "He made you uncomfortable, didn't he? I've helped you." I mustered the courage to reply, "Who are you? What do you want?" There was no specific answer, just another video. In the video, I saw myself leaving the restroom at the restaurant. A hidden camera recorded a man hiding behind a locker right after me. The final message almost made me drop the phone. "He's not the only one following you." The police traced the IP address and found an abandoned house. When they broke in, a foul odor hit them as soon as they entered. Deeper inside, they found a dark room with a flickering overhead light, casting a cold glow on a body tied to a chair in the middle of the room. Inside the secret room, the police found dozens of photos of me taped to the walls, taken from different angles. My daily schedule was carefully recorded, hour by hour. A computer contained hundreds of fake LinkedIn accounts. The police recovered data and found fake conversations, including threatening messages to me. Some older photos of other women were also found. The police began to question, was I the only victim he had been obsessed with? Fingerprints found at the scene were matched, and the result left me speechless. All of them belonged to Lucas. When confessing his motive, Lucas said that he had been in love with me, but I only saw him as a friend. When he saw Richard flirting with me, he planned everything, created fake accounts, sent threatening messages, making me believe that Richard was the only dangerous one. But in reality, he was the true monster. As he was led away in handcuffs, Lucas looked at me with a crazed smile. "I've gotten rid of him, Emma. Now no one will hurt you." My whole body trembled uncontrollably. I knew I could never escape the darkness he had spread.
My name's Owen. I'm 32 years old. I'm married for a year now. Me and my wife, we're residing in Long Island. We are living in a rather old house. According to our knowledge, we're the fourth owner of the estate, existed for 30 years now. As all newlyweds, we're not rich, so both of us decided to pick up this estate, being the most affordable for us. The house is rather sturdy, even after many decades. The only catch was its rather old-fashioned design. Whoever built this lodging and owned it first must be someone rather wealthy. However, after 6 months residing here, there were strange things that occurred to us that defied all logical explanation. One evening, my wife and I were having our time watching movies in the living room. It was a rom-com, which was ruined at the climatic moment as I noticed something in the corner of my eyes, enough to startle me to a yelp. "What's going on?" My wife, also startled, asked me back. "There's a pale woman behind the TV, hon." She just laughed it off, saying that I'm seeing things, despite the fact that I've tried to describe that woman for her. Pale white figure, sunken eyes, but she wasn't buying it, telling me that I was hallucinating things that weren't there. Another time, I had to relieve myself in the middle of the night. When I was in front of the sink and watching myself in the mirror, she came to me again. She was right there behind my back, and this time, I was able to see her more clearly. Emaciated, pale, with sunken eyes. The sight was more than enough to send me running to a panic attack. The third time I saw her was when I was cleaning the floor. She was walking rather heavily, slowly toward the basement behind the main house. She was wearing a long dress, the type of which went out of fashion many years ago. Singing along the way, with her haunting voice echoing along the hallways, she looked pregnant with swollen abdomen. This time my wife did consider what I told her, but she instead thought of me having psychological issues due to overworking. Why the heck am I the only person seeing things when my wife's immune to that shit? So I decided to purchase a more modern house in downtown area with a 20-year payment plan terms. I would go nuts staying here any longer. The house now I'll redecorate and put it for rent. To fasten the paces, I chose the hourly rate cleaning service. There were too many things to clean up here, so it took more than a day to complete. With cleaning up complete, we have finally decided on what to carry forward and what to discard. However, the two cleaning staffs said about a rather heavy metal chest in the basement that they would like to have me help in carrying it upstairs. I knew about this chest the day we moved in, but due to it being very heavy, we decided to leave it there for good. It took all four of us a lot of work to finally haul it out of the basement area. With things finally arranged, except for the heavy chest, we could finally rest. Tomorrow I'd deal with it. Likely it would need to be towed away. That was our final night here at the old house. However, weird things started to come up again. There's a lot of creepy sounds coming from the metal chest. First was the weeping of a woman. Then came loud bangs echoing from within the chest. Last but not least, the wailing of a child wheezing from within the accursed object. I could barely sleep while my wife's sleeping soundly that night. The next morning, having enough of it, I decided to open it up. My wife nagged at me for being unreasonable, but I couldn't stand it any longer. I felt an urge to open it up, to come to terms with all of my suffering. So I pried it open with all my strength. A nasty smell from within assaulted my sense of smell, gagged me up, forced me to vomit under such nauseating stench. My wife threw me a look of concern. For her, I was being unreasonable, and now was reaping the consequences. After calming myself down, I decided to look inside the chest, and immediately regret that decision. The first thing I saw was human feet. then arms, and finally, a human face. All was submerged within a fluid of something like paint. Now thinking back, I wished I did have a mental issue like my wife said. At least I could forget what I'd seen there. So I called the police, fighting the nausea the entire time. The police said it was the body of a woman. She was heavily pregnant at the 9th month by the time she was dead. Needless to say, we were in a state of shock and panic at the news. She was found shrunken to a fetal position, still clutching within the out-of-fashion long dress. The same one that I had seen her in the mirror with. After thorough examinations, they found the chest originated from an industrial factory only 12 miles away. However, the chest model was out of commission a decade ago already. Me and my wife, we also provided the information of the previous owner to the police. They quickly found the third and second owner after backtracking, tracing it up to the very first owner. The two previous owners claimed that the chest had always been there when they moved in. That thing, however, was so heavy that they all decided to just leave it there, and then it was forgotten. So the police searched for the first owner. His name's Thomas, the builder of this house, and also the owner of that previously mentioned factory. However, he'd passed away 3 years ago due to a heart attack. Thomas had a wife and a son who's almost 30 years old now. After mentioning about the body in the chest, they claimed no knowledge about that. Thomas divorced his wife when his son was only 4 years of age. She's been living away for all this time, only receiving alimony arrangement from her previous husband. Because it was related to Thomas, the body within was likely his mistress. So the police suggested a DNA test of the unborn child and Thomas's son. The match was solid at 25%. They were indeed half-siblings. The case, however, was only 50% completed. There's still a lot of questions going unanswered, like who's the killer and what's the motive for the killing. But the most haunting for me was when I was looking at Thomas's picture. He and I were uncannily familiar. I am Roger, 39 years old. I've been working as a delivery driver for UPS for 8 years now. The job is quite demanding, requiring me to be physically fit and flexible with my time. But in return, I have a decent income to support my family. One evening, I received an urgent overtime request from management. It was already past 10 p.m., so I quickly changed into my uniform and left home without saying a word to my wife. I arrived at the company at 10:30 p.m. where the manager hurriedly called me over. He was Peter, a kind and cheerful manager, 4 years older than me. Peter handed me a delivery order sheet. Peter was wearing a mask, coughing continuously, and his behavior was quite strange. He said that this delivery was directly assigned by him because it was urgent and very important. However, Peter was running a high fever, so he trusted me to take over this delivery. Before I could read the delivery address, the quantity of goods, or the delivery time, Peter said he had already checked everything for me. I quickly drove to the delivery address without much time to spare. I followed Peter's instructions, eager to get on the road. I would double-check the address while driving. Glancing at the delivery address, I was a bit surprised. It was in Boston, Massachusetts, about 200 kilometers northeast of my current location. The items were cosmetics and dietary supplements. The customer requested delivery within 3 hours. I wondered how important it could be to require delivery at such a late hour. I encouraged myself to try to complete the delivery early and go home to rest. Looking at the clock in the car, it was almost 1 a.m., and I was starting to feel sleepy. I usually have coffee prepared in the car, but that night, it was all gone without me noticing. With no rest stops in sight, I turned up the rock music, hoping it would keep me alert. The loud music didn't make me any more awake, but at least it kept me from getting drowsier. I slowed down a bit to ensure safety. Suddenly, I heard someone, though I couldn't tell if they were whispering, moaning, or
crying. It must have been background noise from the song I was listening to, as it spoke of the heartache of a lovelorn boy. I brushed it off and continued driving, searching for a rest stop. After a stretch of Henry Road, I finally came across a rest area. Just as I turned off the music, I heard the sound of dripping water. I startled, thinking about the possibility of the cosmetics encountering an issue. I quickly got out of the car to check the cargo. Luckily, everything seemed fine, probably just my sleepiness getting to me. But these bottles of cosmetics had a strong chemical smell. I went into the convenience store next to the rest area, bought a pastry and a hot coffee. Now I was truly awake. With 80 kilometers left to go, I was confident I could deliver this shipment on time. But then I got lost on a rough dirt road with large rocks causing the car to shake violently. I heard the glass bottles under the trunk clinking against each other, making my heart skip a beat. I'd have to pay a hefty sum if I damaged the customer's goods. The road was too dark. The car hit a large rock and jolted. The sound of breaking glass echoed. On reflex, I hit the brakes, turning back to the trunk with a look of horror on my face. But what I saw next terrified me even more. I saw Peter, my manager, with a pale face, his eyes dripping with blood. I slammed on the brakes as hard as I could, trying to widen my eyes to see clearly, but Peter was gone. The feeling of seeing a ghost doesn't compare to seeing someone you know, but they're in a horrifying state. It took me a few minutes for my stiff body to move again, but my heart was still pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. I panicked, my limbs unsure of what to do to keep driving. I kept pressing the accelerator, the car speeding faster, making me even more frantic. I reached out, pressing every button, the horn, the turn signals, the headlights. But my foot remained firmly on the accelerator. Ahead was a large tree. I was still accelerating, the car reaching speeds of up to 80 kilometers an hour. Luckily, I managed to hit the brakes in time. The car screeched to a halt, the entire force thrusting forward, the cargo compartment echoing with the sound of tearing bags and a series of crashes. I knew I had just caused something horrifying. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I breathed heavily, trying to regain my composure, the strong smell of bleach wafting up from the cargo. I stepped out of the car almost holding my breath, slowly opening the cargo door and shining my flashlight. A mixture of bleach and the metallic smell of blood spilled out from the inside. As I shone the flashlight inside, a man in uniform similar to mine lay amidst numerous bottles and jars, his body covered in blood. As I slowly illuminated the area, I saw blood flowing from his chest, 3 wounds resembling gunshot wounds in the center of his chest. And the most horrifying thing was, he was my manager, Peter. My entire body went limp. I lost the ability to control myself. Even my brain seemed to stop functioning for a few minutes. I don't remember how I managed to return to the driver's seat. It was only after I finished calling the police that I noticed my phone screen was covered in blood and dirt. My hands were scratched, with some fingers even torn with nails. Only then did I feel the pain. When the police arrived, I couldn't remain conscious enough to answer any more of their questions. The horrifying events didn't stop there. My company office was reported to have caught fire that very night. The police suspect that the person I encountered that evening was one of my colleagues at the company pretending to be a manager. He took advantage of my trust, deceived me into taking the body far away, then set fire to destroy all evidence and fled. The police are still searching for the whereabouts of that cold-blooded murderer. I requested a 2-week leave to stabilize my mental state, and afterward, I was promoted to manager by the company. It's been 13 years, but the image of Peter that dark night still haunts me. The killer still hasn't been caught. He could be lurking somewhere, observing my life.
I'm Lauren. Decided to be a single mom to raise my son, Baron. This horrific thing happened to my mom and my son 3 years ago, back when Baron was 6. It was early December and Christmas, the biggest holiday of the year, was coming up. The streets were lit up with sparkling lights all over the fake Christmas trees along the sidewalks, making it feel all cozy, even in the cold. The busy tunes from the cafes and shops mixed with all the laughter from the shoppers. I took Baron out to grab some stuff and soak up the vibe. Inside the store, there were huge pine trees covered in lights and booths full of colorful gifts, making it feel like you were in some kind of holiday wonderland. My son and I headed out once the cart was full, and he was super hyped about the stuff we just got. At the entrance, we saw a Santa Claus guy, waving and looking all chill and friendly. Baron ran over all excited. Santa's gotta be every kid's favorite when Christmas rolls around. The kid gave Santa a friendly hello and grabbed his hand. I was pretty sure this was just a store employee. They really know how to grab people's attention and make them happy. I pushed the cart forward, gave a little smile and nod like I was saying hi. Santa smiled and asked Baron what he wanted for Christmas. An RC jet. I love it. It's so cool. Baron was totally pumped. I laughed a little, since that was actually the gift I was going to get him. You'll totally get the gift you want, for you're a good kid, right? Santa's compliments, along with the little reminder, made Baron nod. The way the guy acting like Santa talked was hilarious. He also asked how things were going for me as a single mom. At first, I was touched by the sympathy, but then it was clear I hadn't told him anything about myself, but he knew all about it. I smiled kinda shy and gave him a suspicious look. Hey, you ever heard that song about Santa kissing the mom on Christmas Eve, kid? He asked Baron, but his eyes, smile, and the whole vibe of the question were aimed at me. Before Baron could even react, and I was totally surprised, that Santa came up and kissed my hand all close-like. He didn't stop there, though. He tried to get even closer. I quickly stepped back and pulled my son away, feeling pretty frustrated. When I got to the parking lot, I looked back at the entrance, and that Santa was gone. Some people have such a weird attitude when it comes to customer service. Or is it just how people see things? I quickly shook off the thoughts about that Santa and started getting dinner ready for us. After dinner, we just kicked back in the living room, watching the Christmas special until it got pretty late. Out of nowhere, someone knocked on the door. I looked over, and then it knocked again. I told my son to stay put and walked over to the door. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anyone to show up at 10 at night. I didn't open the door, just stood a few steps back and asked, "Who's there?" I heard that familiar laugh, like in Christmas movies, and then he said, "It's Santa." Right away, Baron yelled and ran over, but I signaled him to chill and stay put. I asked him what he was doing here so late. This wasn't even the day for giving gifts to kids. Honestly, I was just trying to keep things cool for Baron, but I was pretty sure there was a scammer behind the door. The guy claiming to be Santa said he found something I dropped at Kroger this morning. So, it was that store employee my mom and I ran into earlier. I asked him what the item was, but he just gave me some vague, smart aleck answer. I don't know, but just open the door and I'll show you. Thanks, but I didn't drop anything, and if I did, I wouldn't need it back. The guy clearly had no clue what I was talking about. He just kept going on about me opening the door and all the knocking. I made it clear again and told him I'd call the police if he stuck around for another 5 minutes. Eventually, he just left. I took Baron to the bedroom, and he wouldn't stop asking about Santa. I had no idea how to explain it to him. He'd totally freak out if I told him Santa wasn't real. The next morning, I called up Kroger's customer service to complain about their employees bugging me. But the info they gave me was wild. They said they don't have any employees dressed up as Santa at the entrance. I froze up, anxiety hitting me all at once. If he wasn't a store employee, then who the heck was he? My mind was all over the place with questions, and I couldn't focus the rest of the morning. I called the police right away and told them everything I could remember. They said they'd look into it and boost patrols around the area to keep things safe. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little sound freaked me out. I kept checking my windows and doors, feeling like something was watching me. A week later, the police called and said they caught some sketchy guy. He'd been reported for the same kind of harassment before, and turns out he had a record for burglary and trespassing too. After being grilled, he finally admitted to it. I was glad to hear he got arrested, but those cold eyes stuck with me for a long time. Baron was way too young to get what happened, but I figured I should teach him to be careful around strangers, even if they seemed friendly. That Christmas, we still put up the tree, swapped gifts, and made great memories with our son and family. But deep down, I kept reminding myself to stay on guard. The world's got its fair share of Christmas magic, but also some unexpected dangers. I am Benny, 14 years old. The horrifying and haunting story I'm about to tell took place just a few months ago. Everything is still clear, down to the smallest detail in my mind. I was in 9th grade at a small high school in the outskirts of Michigan. It was a peaceful place where everyone knew each other, and everything seemed very simple. I had 2 close friends, Janet and Kathy. Janet stood out with her shiny blonde hair, slim figure, and the confidence that made everyone take notice. Kathy, on the other hand, had a fuller figure, a cheerful face, and a gentle personality. In my eyes, Kathy was always lovable and kind, but Janet often didn't think the same way. She would often make sarcastic remarks about Kathy's appearance. Janet was always confident, but sometimes that confidence turned into arrogance and cruelty. At first, I just stayed silent when I heard Janet talk badly about Kathy. But as the words became more rude and hurtful, I decided to speak up to her. Janet just gave a slight laugh, telling me I was being too sensitive, overreacting, and didn't change her attitude. Despite that, Janet still acted friendly with Kathy in front of everyone, as if nothing had happened. I knew Kathy noticed this, but she never reacted. One afternoon after school, Janet suddenly invited me, Kathy, and a few other classmates to Burger King, and we all agreed. Burger King was Kathy's favorite, and I could clearly see the joy on her face when she heard the location. The group eagerly walked into the restaurant, laughter and chatter filling the air. Janet ordered a lot of food, burgers, fries, milkshakes, and even a few desserts. She said she would treat everyone, which made the atmosphere even more cheerful, and we all began to dig in. Kathy ate with bright eyes and a smile full of happiness. It was a rare moment when she no longer worried about gossip or scrutinizing stares. Janet suddenly took out her phone and secretly took a photo of Kathy while she was eating. Then, Janet raised her phone, pointed it towards everyone, and burst out laughing while pointing at the screen. She began to mock Kathy's appearance, making cruel comments about the way Kathy ate and her looks. I said in a serious tone, reminding Janet to stop, but she acted as if she hadn't heard me. Kathy froze, her face turning red, her eyes filled with shame and hurt. Kathy stood up abruptly, her trembling hands crushing the burger in her grip. Kathy turned and ran out of Burger King without saying a word. The group fell silent, a heavy feeling enveloping the air. Janet, seemingly unbothered, just shrugged and continued eating as if nothing had happened. I sat there looking out the window, feeling angry and helpless. I know Kathy will never forget this moment, and that torments me. After that, Kathy became different. She stopped eating, saying that she wanted to lose weight. Kathy's lunch was just a bottle of water, and she refused every invitation to eat with me. Kathy's skin was pale, her eyes were dark-circled, and her movements were sluggish. I was worried, but Kathy always said that she was fine. One day, Kathy fainted in the middle of the schoolyard. She was taken to the infirmary and hospitalized shortly afterward. When I visited Kathy in the hospital, she was crying uncontrollably. Kathy said that she felt ashamed of her body and didn't want to go back to school. I tried to comfort her, telling her that she didn't need to change herself because of cruel words. But deep down, I knew that Janet's words had left a deep psychological scar on Kathy. Kathy took a week off from school to recover both physically and mentally. I hoped that the time off would help her feel better. But the day Kathy was supposed to return to school was also the day everything fell apart. That morning, the class went on as usual, but both Janet and Kathy were absent. The homeroom teacher anxiously left the classroom to search for the two of them. I couldn't sit still either. The feeling of unease grew stronger and stronger. About 20 minutes later, the classroom door opened. Kathy walked in, but the sight before us froze me and the whole class. Kathy's body was covered in a sticky red layer that hadn't dried yet, with drops of it dripping down from her uniform. A satisfied smile was on her lips, but her eyes were empty and indifferent. The homeroom teacher rushed over and asked Kathy what had happened. Kathy was panting, but her voice was eerily calm. "This is not my blood." Before we could even comprehend what was happening, a scream suddenly rang out, and the whole class froze in shock. The police and security were called immediately. I don't remember how I ran up there. I just know that my legs didn't stop until I saw Janet. She was lying on the ground, motionless, in a large pool of red. Janet's body was covered in cuts, with a deep gash on her neck. Janet's eyes were wide open, lifeless, as if she was still terrified of something before she passed. I stood there, my body trembling, unable to believe what I was seeing. Kathy was taken away by the police right after that. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just silently followed, as if she had already prepared for this moment. In that moment, I didn't recognize the friend I once knew. Rumors began to spread throughout the school. Some people said that Kathy had taken revenge on Janet for the cruel words she had said before. Others said that Kathy had lost control after enduring so much for so long. Now, I don't know how to move past these terrifying memories. Kathy, the kind and sweet friend I once knew, has now become a part of an endless nightmare. Janet, the girl who was once full of confidence and pride, is now just a pain. My name is Doyle. When I was 10 years old, I had a very strange hobby. I loved wandering through the woods to find animal bones and bring them home to keep as treasures. My family lived in a neighborhood right on the edge of the forest. Behind our neighbor's house, there was a trail that led deep into the old-growth woods. Every kid in the area was strictly forbidden from going back there, but because of my obsession, I always found a way to sneak past the rules. I usually slipped away when my parents weren't paying attention. Once I successfully escaped into the woods, I would jump for joy and start my search. I could spend hours, or even a whole afternoon, with my head down, eyes scanning the ground, and hands constantly digging through the dirt. One afternoon, I prepared to head into the forest as usual. From the moment I stepped past the tree line behind the neighbor's house, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. But it was a perfect opportunity because my parents were going to be home late. Plus, my collection was almost complete.
so I decided to push forward. The forest was incredibly quiet that day. There was no sun, so the scenery looked very gloomy. I thought about turning back, but then a small glint of light suddenly appeared between the trees. I was curious because I had never seen it before, and I subconsciously started to follow it. I went deep inside, deeper than I had ever gone before, until the light vanished. In front of me stood an old wooden cabin I had never seen. The roof was rotting, the windows were dark like empty eye sockets, and vines covered the walls. It looked exactly like a witch's house from the cartoons I used to watch. I felt a chill, but I was also excited, so I moved closer. Right next to the porch, I was drawn to a bunch of bones scattered on the ground. I assumed they were animal bones, so I knelt down to examine them. However, I quickly realized that some of the bones had unusual shapes. They were also quite large compared to the types I usually collected. I kept looking, thinking I might find a perfect piece to add to my collection. As I stepped forward, I saw a skull resting in a pile of decaying leaves. The black, hollow eye sockets were staring right at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. But for a kid with such a weird hobby, I was pretty brave. I leaned in even closer to get a look, using my hand to brush away some leaves so I could see it clearly. When the skull was fully exposed, I saw that the jaw didn't look like any animal I owned, like a dog or a fox. And then, my heart hammered so hard it felt like it would explode out of my chest when I realized it was a human skull. I screamed and ran for my life. I crashed through thorn bushes, not daring to look back. Just as I was about to make it out of the woods, I suddenly saw a man standing right in the middle of the trail. He was very tall and thin, wearing a heavy coat even though the weather wasn't cold at all. What terrified me the most was his unblinking stare and a subtle, knowing smirk. I stopped a few yards away from him. Suddenly, he tilted his head, looked at me, and asked in a very low voice, "Did you find any bones?" That question made me freeze for a few seconds. I was stunned that he knew what I had been doing. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and bolted past him, heading straight for home. When I saw my parents, I immediately burst into tears and told them everything. After I described the location of the cabin, my father's expression completely changed. For the first time, I heard my parents talk about something the adults in the neighborhood had always kept secret from the children. 5 years earlier, a boy my age had gone missing after walking into those woods alone. The police searched for nearly a year, but found nothing. After the incident, the boy's parents were so heartbroken that they moved away. The case had remained a mystery ever since. The police immediately cordoned off the forest for almost a week. My parents absolutely refused to tell me what they found inside that cabin. But from that day on, the trail behind the neighbor's house was fenced off, and I was permanently banned from going near those woods again. Whenever I remember it, the fear returns. I don't want to confirm the truth. But what makes me wake up gasping in the middle of the night is the memory of that man on the trail. That unblinking stare and the question about the bones. Was he the killer? And if he was, why was he still there after all those years?
My name is Chris, and this is a story about something I saw with my own eyes 5 years ago. To this day, I still don't have the courage to open the photos I took that night. It was a solo camping trip over the weekend. I chose a remote forest located about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. As I drove deeper into the woods, my cell phone signal disappeared completely. After setting up my tent by a creek, I grabbed my camera. I decided to hike deeper into the forest to catch some landscape shots at sunset. While following a strange, moss-covered trail, I suddenly spotted flickering lights in the distance. As I got closer, I discovered an old church sitting isolated in a large clearing. In front of the church, hundreds of people dressed in white were gathered in total silence around a tree. At first, I was just curious. I figured it was some kind of strange local religious ceremony, so I hid behind a large trunk to watch. But very quickly, my curiosity turned into pure horror. A thin man, with his hands and feet tightly bound, was kneeling at the base of the tree. A rope was looped around his neck and tossed over a high branch. 3 well-dressed men, who looked very different from the rest of the crowd, stepped forward. They began to pull the rope that hung over the branch. The man was instantly yanked upward, his feet dangling and kicking in midair. The surrounding crowd began to sing in unison. The man struggled violently and tried to scream for help, but the singing drowned him out. I felt like my legs were going to give out. I was all alone, and I knew I would be in grave danger if I confronted that many people. With no cell service, I couldn't call anyone for help. After only a few minutes, the man stopped moving completely. As soon as his limp body was lowered to the ground, the crowd began to cheer joyfully, as if they had just finished a sacred ritual. In total shock, I raised my camera and snapped a few photos for evidence. Then, I scrambled away in a daze. While trying to find my way back to camp, I accidentally circled around to the back of the church. I stumbled upon a field filled with wooden crosses packed tightly together. Many of the mounds of dirt were fresh and bright red, looking as if they had just been filled. At the edge of the field, I saw a child, about 10 years old, tied to a tree. I rushed over to untie the boy, but his reaction sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't scared, and he wasn't happy to see me. He looked at me with eyes that were completely hollow and soulless. When I urged him to run with me, he just shook his head. He spoke as calmly as if he were talking about a field trip. "I can't go yet. It's almost my turn. After the wedding day, we will all get to see God." I shuddered as I realized this child had been completely brainwashed. The wedding day ritual he mentioned was the horrific strangling I had just witnessed. As I tried to convince him one more time, a shout rang out behind me. 2 tall men in dark coats emerged from the shadows. They pointed directly at me and screamed. I tried to pull the boy with me to run, but he broke free and refused to follow. I had no choice. I had to run to save my own life. It was a true fight for survival. I tore through thorn bushes, feeling the sharp branches rip into my skin. The number of men in black chasing me grew. In my panic, I slipped and tumbled down a small slope, hitting a rock hard. I could barely stand up. However, the slope hid me from view, and the forest was thick and dark. I lay perfectly still as the men ran right past me without noticing. I had accidentally found the perfect hiding spot. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled out and ran toward the main road near town before dawn. I immediately took all my photos and my story to the local police station. I thought I had uncovered a mass kidnapping and murder site, and I expected a large-scale rescue mission. But their reaction was confusing. They glanced at the photos, exchanged a knowing look with each other, and simply said they would send someone to check it out. A few days later, I was told that the leader of the group had been arrested, but was quickly released due to insufficient evidence. I tried to explain about the strangled man and the tied-up child, but the police claimed it could have been a voluntary religious ritual. They said my photos weren't clear enough to prove anything. I was stunned and felt completely helpless against their ridiculous excuses and lazy investigation. A few days later, while I was still reeling from the shock, I received an anonymous text. "Stop digging if you want to stay safe." That was when I understood. The leader's release wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It gave him time to go back and scrub the evidence now that I had exposed the location. Perhaps those well-dressed men pulling the rope had much deeper connections than just some forest cult. For the past 5 years, I have been haunted by that child's hollow eyes. I watched a crime happen right in front of me, but in the end, I couldn't save anyone. I might have even accidentally helped the killers cover their tracks. I still have those photos on an old hard drive, but I have never dared to look at them again. The story is inspired by a real-life case. The Shakahola cult, led by Paul Mackenzie, is considered one of Kenya's most horrific tragedies. Initially, Mackenzie lured hundreds of followers with staged miracle cures, then brainwashed them into believing the apocalypse was coming and that modern society was a tool of evil. He forced followers to sell all their possessions and move to an isolated 800-acre forest. There, Mackenzie ordered followers to starve to death to meet God, with children dying first. When many no longer wanted to die, he created a wedding day ritual where guards directly strangled or beat victims to death amidst the cheers of the crowd. By 2024, authorities had unearthed more than 450 bodies, many victims showing signs of organ harvesting. Mackenzie and dozens of accomplices are currently being prosecuted for murder, terrorism, and child torture. I accidentally saved the monster on a snowy night. I have lived alone in a log cabin deep in the woods of Montana for nearly 15 years. It was the most violent blizzard I had seen in all my years in the forest. In the middle of the night, while I was reinforcing the cabin door, I heard a frantic knocking and the sound of someone moaning. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see a young man in terrible shape, nearly frozen to death. He was shaking uncontrollably in tattered clothes, and his face was as white as a sheet. He kept whispering, begging me to let him stay for just one night. Seeing him like that, I couldn't turn him away. I threw more wood into the fireplace, grabbed a blanket, and made him a hot pot of tea. After he calmed down a bit, he thanked me, though his voice was still trembling. It was clear he had been through something absolutely horrific. I checked on him and learned his name was Philip. He said he had been on a hiking trip with his girlfriend, Mia, to propose to her. Hearing this made me suspicious. This time of year was a terrible time for a long hike. Philip started telling his story through choked sobs, claiming they were attacked by wild animals. He said he had to watch Mia being torn apart right in front of his eyes, unable to do anything to help. He sat huddled by the fire, muttering about the gruesome scene like someone on the verge of a mental breakdown. I tried to comfort Philip and asked for the exact location of the attack. I know this terrain like the back of my hand and trust my survival skills. I thought maybe there was still hope for Mia, or at least I could bring back whatever was left of her. But Philip didn't answer. He just kept crying and calling out his girlfriend's name. I figured he was too traumatized to talk, so I stopped pushing and went to cook him a bowl of soup. As I brought the soup out, the storm outside reached its peak. The wind was so strong that falling branches slammed against the cabin's tin roof with a loud roar. I quickly went around the house to make sure everything was secure, but when I walked back into the living room, the atmosphere had turned bone-chilling. Philip wasn't crying anymore. He wasn't shaking or huddling either. He was sitting straight up in the chair with an eerily calm expression, his sharp eyes staring directly at me. A remote location, extreme weather, plus the hungry animals out there, Philip repeated slowly, looking out the window. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Then, Philip gave a slight smile. It's the perfect way to make sure nobody ever finds anything. I froze. The bowl of soup in my hand nearly slipped to the floor. Philip looked up at me, and his eyes were now the eyes of a predator enjoying his prize. Philip began to speak in a flat, calm voice about how he had lured Mia into an area with animal tracks. He described watching her panic and run into the blizzard, and how the forest quickly swallowed her screams. He wasn't a victim. He was a killer who was proud of his crime. He burst into a delighted laugh that echoed throughout the cabin. In that moment, I realized I had invited a demon into my home. I stayed as calm as I could, trying not to draw his attention as I backed up toward the wall near the dining table. My hunting shotgun was hanging right there, but Philip was faster than I expected. The moment my hand touched the gun, he pulled a folding knife from his jacket and lunged at me like a rabid animal. Everything happened in a flash. We wrestled in the middle of the cramped cabin. I realized he was much stronger than he looked, and every strike he threw was aimed to kill. The sharp blade kept grazing my face.
I managed to point the barrel at him, but in a split second of hesitation because I didn't want to become a killer myself, Philip lunged and knocked the gun aside. Immediately after, he buried the blade deep into my shoulder. Philip laughed with excitement when he heard me scream in pain. His overconfidence gave me one last chance. I pushed through the pain, used every bit of my strength to kick him hard in the stomach, and scrambled for the gun. Philip lunged again, but this time, I was faster. As soon as I grabbed the shotgun, I aimed at his legs and pulled the trigger repeatedly. But instead of screaming in agony, he just looked down at his wounds and started laughing like a complete madman. I quickly tied him up and secured him to the window bars. Since there was no cell service to call the police, I had to guard this wild animal all through the night and until the next afternoon. The ordeal ended when I handed Philip over to the police and gave them all the information about the girl named Mia. According to what I learned later, the police found traces of the crime. Mia was real, but all that remained of the poor girl were 2 fingers and a single shoe buried in the snow. She had been consumed by wild animals, exactly as his cruel plan intended. Ever since that night with Philip, if a man knocks on my door, I refuse to open it. I thought I had lived in the woods long enough to know what was dangerous, until I opened the door and let Philip inside.
My name is Hal, and I am 30 years old. My girlfriend Emily and I are both freelancers. Our lives are never rooted in one place. We live full-time in our van with our 2 dogs, working and traveling across the United States. But sometimes, that freedom comes with risks I never truly expected. I will never forget the fateful day of January 24th, 2023. That day, we were camping in a very remote area in Texas. From early morning, the sky looked gloomy with heavy gray clouds. We turned on our NOAA weather radio to keep track of the situation. At first, we thought it would just be a normal thunderstorm, maybe a bit loud, but it would pass. But the air inside the van suddenly felt suffocating when the radio announced, "Tornado confirmed in the orange sector." Emily looked at me, startled. She rushed to check the weather radar on her phone and gasped, "How? We are right in the middle of that orange zone." I looked at her, worried and speechless. An orange zone meant high danger. A tornado was very likely to hit. We started discussing a plan to move, but everything happened too fast. The wind began to howl, and rain poured down like a waterfall, slamming against the sides of the van. Emily completely panicked. She kept asking me, "Where do we go? What do we do? I can't stay calm, Hal." Because Emily was so upset, I had to force myself to stay level-headed, even though I was just as terrified inside. Our 2 dogs huddled in the corner of the van. They could sense the tension and the danger in the air. I quickly assessed the situation. The only road out of the area was already blocked by fallen trees and flying debris. Initially, we decided to hunker down inside the van, hoping it would be strong enough to protect us. I pulled Emily close, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. But that tiny bit of hope was cruelly crushed. The radio blared an emergency alert. "A large and extremely dangerous tornado has been located in the area. Complete destruction is possible. Take cover immediately." The phrase, "complete destruction," echoed in my head like a death sentence. Suddenly, the van didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a thin tin can waiting to be crushed. Emily began to sob, clutching me and the two dogs as if it were the last time. Then the peak of the horror arrived. A strange sound came from the distance. At first, it was a low rumble on the horizon, but within seconds, it amplified into an earth-shattering roar. "What is that? Is that a train?" Emily screamed through her tears. The roar sounded like dozens of freight trains charging toward us at a terrifying speed. I realized that was the freight train sound people always use to describe a tornado. It was headed straight for us. The van began to shake violently against the force of the wind. Everything inside flipped over, shattering across the floor. I could feel the van being lifted, tilting to one side. In a split second, I realized staying in the car was suicide. The van would be tossed like a dry leaf, and we would die inside it. "Move! Get out now! To the back!" I yelled. Pure instinct took over. I threw open the back doors of the van. The wind immediately rushed in, blowing our belongings out into the storm. We grabbed the dogs and leaped out of the van into a storm that was tearing the sky apart. About 10 yards away, there was a shallow drainage ditch filled with swirling mud and murky water. We dove into it. I pushed Emily and the dogs flat against the bottom of the ditch and used my own body to shield them. In that moment, I heard the sound of metal being torn apart right above my head. The screaming wind wasn't just wind anymore. It was the roar of a monster swallowing everything in its path. Dirt, rocks, branches, and pieces of our van flew over us. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the freezing, muddy water soak into my skin, silently praying for a miracle. "You're going to be okay, I promise. We're going to make it," I whispered in her ear. It felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was probably only 5 to 7 minutes. The eye of the tornado passed, the train sound faded away, and all that was left was heavy rain and the haunting silence of a battlefield. When we slowly lifted our heads from the mud, the landscape was completely unrecognizable. Our van was flipped on its side, twisted like a piece of crumpled paper. Nearby storage buildings had been leveled into piles of brick and scrap. But somehow, we were still there. Emily, the dogs, and I, all of us were soaked, shivering, and covered in mud, but no one was seriously hurt. We held each other tight in the middle of the wreckage, crying tears of joy because we were alive. The decision to leave the van at the last second saved our lives. If we had stayed inside for one more minute, the outcome would have been unthinkable. In that life-or-death moment, love and survival instinct led us to make the right choice.
This story happened in the summer of 2011, when I was only 14 years old. To give you a better picture, my family owned a remote piece of land in western Maryland. It was private property deep in the mountains, where almost everyone living nearby was related to my family in one way or another. I grew up there running around with my cousins, and I always believed it was the safest place in the world. But a fateful day by the Savage River shattered that innocent belief forever. It was a sweltering summer afternoon. My cousin, who was 1 year older than me, and I decided to go for a walk along the rugged dirt path that follows the rushing Savage River. My cousin was a little junior entomologist, so he spent the whole time with his eyes glued to the ground, looking for bugs or crawfish. I just strolled along beside him, enjoying the sound of the water hitting the rocks. Everything seemed normal until I heard a very distinct sound. A sharp click echoed through the quiet air. It wasn't a branch snapping, and it wasn't the sound of stones hitting each other. I whipped my head toward the opposite bank of the river. Not even 15 feet away, a stranger had just stepped out from the thick brush. He was wearing a black jacket and holding a camera that was still pointed directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his large frame and felt a terrifying certainty that he was staring right at me. Then, he smiled. I knew he was smiling because I could see his teeth clearly. His shoulders shook slightly, and a low, muffled laugh drifted across the water. Before I could even react, I heard another click. He took a second photo. I flinched and stepped back, but I froze. Then, he lowered his camera, kept that same smile on his face, and slowly wagged his index finger back and forth. The gesture was unmistakable, exactly like the way an adult wags their finger when scolding a child for doing something wrong. I didn't know what that signal meant, but my heart started racing. Next, he pointed down at his side. I followed his hand and saw a knife sheath attached to his belt. Then, he brought his hand up to his throat and slowly, deliberately, drew his finger across it in a slit throat motion. In that moment, my mind went completely blank. I couldn't think of anything specific. I only had one reflex. I lunged over, grabbed my cousin's arm, and screamed, "Run! Run now!" As soon as we turned to bolt, I heard a third click behind us, followed immediately by the sound of water splashing. Splash, splash! He was wading through the river, coming after us. I sprinted for my life through the dense bushes, my heart pounding like it wanted to jump out of my chest. The path back home was full of rocks and slippery roots. In my total panic, I tripped over a dry branch and fell face first into the dirt. I hit the ground so hard that I could taste the thick, metallic flavor of blood in my mouth. I had bitten through my lip. My knees and hands were stinging, but my fear was 1,000 times stronger than the pain. I wasn't on the ground for even 3 seconds before I scrambled back up, pulling my cousin along as we kept flying. I swear I could hear branches snapping right behind me. When the campsite finally appeared ahead, my legs were nearly numb. My breath was ragged, my throat was bone dry, and my lip was swelling up from the cut. I ran straight into the middle of the adults and told them everything. I described his throat slit gesture in detail, using both my words and my hands. My grandfather didn't ask many questions. He and a few other men in the family grabbed their rifles and headed toward the river path. The atmosphere turned incredibly tense. They searched for 2 hours. When they came back, they shook their heads and said no one was there. They found no suspicious signs at all. When my mother heard this, she sighed. She looked at me with a stern expression and said I was probably just panicking and letting my imagination run wild. "Look at how you've hurt yourself just being so worked up," she said. Of course, I argued back immediately. I tried to explain that I fell because I was running for my life, but she wouldn't change her mind. I turned to my cousin, hoping he would confirm what we saw. But he just looked at everyone and then at me with a confused expression. He scratched his head and said he only ran because he saw me running, but he didn't notice anything else. He hadn't looked at the riverbank, and he didn't hear the camera because he was too busy looking for bugs. That was the moment I learned what it felt like to be completely alone. I stood there under the skeptical eyes of my family, feeling a horrible sense of helplessness. The thing I wanted to do most right then was kick my cousin. 15 years have passed, but I still remember every detail of that man's appearance and his gestures. I always think about those photos he took. I wonder where they are now. Am I sitting in some collection somewhere, captured in a moment of pure terror? I still go back to that campsite with my family every year, but I don't feel comfortable there anymore. I'm always on guard. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. The only thing I'm certain of is that it happened. It was real. I still have a small scar on my lip as a reminder that this memory wasn't just a figment of my imagination.
I'm Nicole, 26, and I love life on the road. I converted an old Ford Transit van into a fully equipped mobile home. I came to the mountains of Montana in early winter. That night was December 17th, and the temperature dropped lower than expected. Even in the wilderness, I'd never felt lonely or scared until that night. I fell into a deep sleep, curled up in my thick sleeping bag, feeling safe in my little van. I jolted awake. My phone showed 4:27 a.m. Maybe it was just a tree branch blown against the van by the wind. The sound came again, and it wasn't a branch. My mind told me it might just be a hiker needing help, but no one hikes at 4 a.m. in such heavy snow. I reached for my phone, trembling as I turned on the video recording app. "I know you're in there. I've been watching you." A deep male voice echoed. My throat tightened. I tried to keep my phone steady. "I don't know you. What do you want?" I crawled towards the driver's seat, careful not to make a sound. Through the windshield, I saw a car parked far away, its headlights blazing. "I like the color of the underwear you're wearing." He sounded amused. My heart stopped. How long had he been watching me? "I've called the police. They're on their way." A raspy laugh replied. "There's no cell service here, Lisa. You checked when you arrived, remember? You even complained about it. A pretty car like this must have a lot of doors. I wonder if you've locked them all." I swallowed hard. The passenger window. It wasn't secure, and I hadn't had time to fix it. My survival instinct kicked in. I lunged for the driver's seat. The keys were already in the ignition. The engine roared to life in the dark. The van lurched forward, almost sliding off the unpaved road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the black car also start to move, its headlights aimed directly at my van. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, speed rocketing to 55 miles per hour on the slippery forest road. The snow fell heavier, visibility reduced to just a few feet in front of me. The other car closed in, less than 15 feet from my tail. I could see the outlines of two men behind the wheel. The road suddenly curved. Instead of slowing down, I tightened my grip on the wheel and took a risk. I knew a small path that continued along the hillside. As I reached the bend, I suddenly pulled the handbrake, sharply turned the wheel, and swerved the van onto the narrow path to the right. The van tilted but held on. The car behind couldn't react in time to the maneuver. It sped straight down the main road, tires screeching in the dark as they realized they'd lost me. I turned off my lights, letting the van slowly coast down the path. After a few minutes, I stopped beside a large rock, hiding the van from the main road. The receding engine sound indicated they had gone in the other direction. All night, I sat leaning against the door, my heart rate unable to return to normal. As soon as dawn broke, I drove to the nearest town's police station. I reported everything. The officer listened, his expression growing more concerned. "I need to tell you something." The officer sighed. "This isn't the first report we've received. In the past 6 months, 3 other women have reported similar experiences when alone at night. What happened to them? 2 of them disappeared 2 weeks later. The third was found, but I don't want to go into detail. So, there's a predator targeting women? Not one. I think they operate as a group." I returned to my van. The sense of safety it once provided was completely gone. I decided to drive home to my parents in Ohio and sell the van. On the way, I stopped in a small town to stay overnight at a hotel. As I walked into the hotel room and locked the door, the images of that terrifying experience kept replaying in my mind. I opened my phone to rewatch the video I had recorded. Maybe I would see something I had missed. With trembling hands, I opened the video file. The screen was pitch black, but the audio was clearly recorded. "Lisa." I replayed that part. The man had called me Lisa, but my name is Nicole. I quickly opened my Instagram app, searching for the name Lisa, along with the keywords van life and Montana. After a few minutes of scrolling, my heart nearly stopped. A young woman named Lisa Wilson, with reddish-brown hair like mine, also lived in a van and had come to Montana 2 months ago. As I looked deeper into her pictures, I noticed many astonishing similarities. Not just the hair color, but also her hairstyle, clothing style, and even how she decorated her van. I scrolled down to Lisa's older posts. She bought her van from the same dealership in Seattle where I bought mine. The Ford Transit model is very popular in the van life community, and metallic silver paint is also a common choice. I scrolled further and discovered that Lisa had worked for the same travel magazine I had contributed to. I believed that if anyone followed both of us on social media, they could easily mistake us for each other. I rushed to my camera bag and pulled out an old memory card I hadn't deleted. There was a photo of a sunrise near the campground, and in the distance, I saw a Ford Transit van identical to mine. My hands trembled as I realized the truth. They mistook me for Lisa. Immediately, I called the police officer who took my report. The police asked me to bring the van to the station for a thorough inspection. My Ford Transit wasn't Lisa's van, but they were almost identical. More importantly, through GPS and gas station data, the police discovered that both Lisa and I had traveled similar routes within the past 2 months. 2 weeks later, I heard that the FBI had arrested 4 suspects at a secluded farm more than 60 miles from me. They found evidence linking them to at least 7 other disappearances in Montana and other states. This network had been operating for years, targeting people living on the road because they had less social contact. Lisa Wilson was not found alive. 6 months later, I'm still trying to rebuild my life in a small apartment in Columbus. I no longer live on the road, but I've never given up on my dream of freedom and exploration. Instead, I'm writing a book about women's safety. In my photography notebook, I still keep a picture of Lisa, the stranger whose life became intertwined with mine by chance. It was a cold, rainy night. It was around 2 a.m., and the temperature outside was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We had just left a fun party and were driving home. We were on a desolate, dark road that runs alongside the Rogue River in Belmont, Michigan. Suddenly, my friend who was driving gasped and stared straight ahead. My friend in the back seat and I quickly looked too, and we saw it. A figure was crawling on the pavement ahead, inching forward. "Is that a person or an animal?" I asked, my voice shaking. We drove closer. My friend at the wheel didn't slow down, but quickly swerved to avoid the thing. Our headlights illuminated it in a flash, and we zipped past. It looked like a woman, her hair matted and covering her face. Her clothes were soaked, and she was crawling in a bizarre way. She looked like a giant spider scuttling across the asphalt. No one spoke for a few seconds. All we heard was the car's engine and our own heavy breathing. After a quick argument, we turned the car around. Our main feeling wasn't curiosity. It was that our conscience wouldn't let us abandon someone in that kind of situation. When we came back, we saw her more clearly. It was a young woman, maybe in her 20s. She was hunched in the middle of the road in an unnatural crouch. Her knees were pressed together, her feet splayed out, and her body was bent forward. Her head was slowly swaying back and forth. We stopped the car a few yards from her. I stared, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, she raised one hand and moved it up and down rhythmically. Then she abruptly stopped. A few seconds later, she started beating her head repeatedly with her hand. We could clearly hear the thud even inside the car. We were all startled by the woman's action. What truly sent a chill down our spines was her expression. In the headlights, we could see her eyes were abnormally wide open, but they weren't focused on anything specific. Her mouth was agape, but no sound came out. Her hair was drenched and stuck to her cheeks and neck. In that cold, there was no way a conscious person would be in that state. We decided to back up a little to observe from a safer distance. Then she started to laugh. It sounded like a terrifying mixture of a cough and a moan, echoing in the empty space. My friend in the back screamed, "Drive! Drive now!" But the driver didn't react. I couldn't take my eyes off the woman either. She stopped laughing and started crawling toward us. She maintained that bizarre posture, arms and legs straight, head low to the ground, yet her face remained fixed on us. The distance between us shrank. I could hear her raspy breathing. My friend quickly slammed the car into reverse. The tires squealed and we backed up about 30 feet, but the woman didn't stop. She kept crawling toward us, one movement after another, maintaining her pace. Then she suddenly froze, completely motionless like a statue. We stopped the car, watching for a moment longer. We all held our breath, not daring to move. Then, as if someone had flipped a power switch, the woman collapsed straight down onto the road. Her body hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Immediately following was the loud impact of her head hitting the road. I winced, imagining how much that must have hurt. I quickly grabbed my phone and called 911, trying to describe what we had just witnessed. But I struggled with the words. She was crawling weirdly. She was hitting her own head, then laughing, and now she's lying still. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, telling us to stay in the car and wait. While waiting, I couldn't take my eyes off the figure lying on the road. About 10 minutes later, the police and an ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed over to check the girl's vital signs. I saw them talking urgently to each other, and they quickly placed her on a stretcher. As they lifted her, I caught one last glimpse of her face. Her eyes were still wide but unfocused. A police officer came over to get information from us. My brain was trying to process everything we had just seen. We were allowed to leave after about 20 minutes of talking with the police. A few hours later, after it was light out, I drove back to the scene alone. What I noticed was some freshly disturbed dirt along the riverbank near the road. This suggested that she had most likely fallen into the Rogue River and struggled to swim onto the road just minutes before our car passed. Over the next few days, the story slowly came together. The woman was named Angela, 28, a student attending Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, over 200 miles away. She had been reported missing 2 days before we encountered her. Angela's friend said that before she disappeared, she constantly talked about feeling like someone was following her. She was always in a state of high stress and on edge. When she finally woke up in the hospital, doctors explained that Angela had experienced a state of dissociative fugue. This is the brain's defense mechanism when a person faces levels of stress and fear that exceed their coping ability. The brain, unable to process the continuous horror, chooses to disconnect from reality. In this state, patients completely forget their identity. They don't know where they are or what they're doing. They can perform complex actions, like driving a car, but have no conscious awareness of those actions. Some studies suggest that patients in this state may experience hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing images that don't exist, and acting on invisible commands. The brain creates an alternative reality to avoid confronting the true fear. Angela had been living in that alternative reality for 2 days. She drove aimlessly, without eating or sleeping. Then somehow, she ended up in the Rogue River. The shock of the freezing water must have roused a part of her consciousness enough for her to crawl onto the road, but not enough to fully regain awareness. I still clearly remember Angela's vacant eyes and her strange actions. What exactly had she gone through for her brain to simply stop processing? Angela physically recovered, but she remembers nothing about those 2 days. She went to sleep on a Friday night and woke up in the hospital on a Monday, completely bewildered. I still occasionally drive past that stretch of road at night. I wonder if there is anyone else wandering out there, someone trapped in a fuzzy world, no longer themselves. Have any of you ever experienced or known someone with dissociative fugue? If so, please share your story below. Perhaps your story will help others recognize the warning signs before it's too late.
My name is Iris, and I live in Leicester, North Carolina, a quiet community that is half country and half suburb. My closest neighbor was a woman named Holly, who lived alone with her 2 pet dogs. Since we both had a habit of waking up early to go jogging, we often ran into each other and would jog together for a stretch. We weren't incredibly close, but we always shared some friendly small talk whenever we met. One morning, I went out for my usual jog, but Holly was nowhere to be found. As I passed by her house, I noticed a strange man standing near her driveway. He looked unkempt with messy hair, and his eyes kept darting around as if he were keeping watch. In his hand, he was holding a black trash bag. The moment our eyes met, he suddenly flashed a friendly smile, which completely contradicted his sneaky behavior from a second ago. It made me feel uncomfortable, and I didn't want to get involved in someone else's business, so I pretended not to notice and kept running. On my second lap around the block, I passed Holly's house again, and the man was gone. However, the black trash bag had been left behind near the edge of the road, about 20 yards away from her property. I assumed he was just some litterbug dumping his garbage in someone else's neighborhood. I didn't see Holly for the rest of my morning jog. I figured she wasn't feeling well and had decided to skip her workout for the day. But by that afternoon, I still hadn't seen her out walking her dogs like she always did. Holly owned 2 large dogs that were incredibly energetic, and she took them outside to run around every single day. Seeing them cooped up felt very strange, and a bad feeling started lingering in the back of my mind. The next morning, as I jogged past her house, I heard the dogs whining from inside. They sounded miserable and highly distressed. Trusting my gut, I stopped and decided to go check on things. I called out her name a few times, but no one answered. Noticing the front door was unlocked and cracked open, I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Following the sound of the whimpering, I found the 2 dogs locked inside a guest bedroom. They were scratching at the door and crying continuously. The moment I let them out, they began searching the house, running straight into Holly's master bedroom to look for their owner. I hurried after them and froze in shock. The safe had been pried wide open, and the bedroom window was smashed to pieces. Sensing that something terrible had happened, I called the police immediately. When the police arrived to inspect the home, they confirmed there were clear signs of a break-in. However, there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, and 0 evidence to prove an attack had actually taken place inside. At first, the officers assumed Holly had simply gone out of town for a few days. That night, right after I drifted off to sleep, I had a horrific nightmare. In the dream, I saw my neighbor dead. Her body was trapped under a car, and a pair of large hands was dragging her away. The scene then shifted into a bathroom, where a man was stripping off her clothes and stuffing them into a black trash bag. I bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, with my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The image of the black trash bag from my nightmare immediately connected with the exact bag the unkempt man had been holding in front of Holly's house the day before. As soon as the sun came up, I contacted the police and gave them every detail about the suspicious stranger. I later learned that the police managed to track the trash collection route for our area. But since 2 days had already passed, the garbage had been hauled to a massive landfill, making the search incredibly difficult. After sorting through mounds of waste, they finally found the black trash bag matching my description. Inside were Holly's blood-stained clothes, along with DNA and fingerprints belonging to the man. The suspect was quickly identified as a man named Gavin. He lived in a remote part of town and had known Holly previously. According to Gavin's confession, everything started as an accident when he asked Holly to help push his stuck vehicle. He claimed he accidentally hit the gas pedal instead of the brake and ran her over, killing her instantly. Instead of panicking or calling 911, the savage killer calmly drove her body to his property, dismembered her, and burned the remains to destroy the evidence. After that, he casually returned to Holly's house, broke the window, and cracked the safe to stage a robbery and throw off the investigation. I thought that was the most horrifying part of the story. But as the police dug deeper into his background, they discovered Gavin was linked to a cold case involving a missing person from 15 years ago. On his property, investigators uncovered a hidden pit containing human skeletal remains that had been burned and concealed for over a decade. To this day, what haunts me the most isn't just what Gavin did to Holly. It is the memory of him standing just a few feet away from me, holding a bag containing his victim's bloody clothes, looking me dead in the eye and smiling. It was the calculated smile of a cold-blooded killer. If I had let my curiosity get the better of me and stopped talking to him that morning, I could have very easily become another missing person on Gavin's record. Following the tragedy, I went through the legal process to adopt Holly's poor dogs. Every day when I walk them down our usual path and look over at Holly's empty house, I silently promise her that I will take the best care of them. It is my way of thanking fate for letting me survive my encounter with a monster. This story is inspired by a true case that shocked the nation in 2015. A young couple, Christy Schoen and Joseph Codd, suddenly vanished from their home in North Carolina while expecting their first child. The crime scene showed signs of a staged break-in. Thanks to neighbors who reported a suspicious vehicle, police arrested Robert Jason Owens, a handyman who knew the family. He confessed to accidentally running them over, dismembering them, and burning their remains in a wood stove. A wider investigation revealed this killer was also responsible for the high-profile disappearance of a college student named Zeb Quinn 15 years earlier in the year 2000.
That fateful night helped me turn my life around, but it happened in the most horrific way a human being could ever experience. My name is Dante. Years ago, when I was an addict living on the streets of Philadelphia, my entire life revolved around finding enough money for my next fix. At first, I worked all kinds of odd jobs like delivering packages and loading trucks to pay for my drugs. But as my addiction grew worse, my body started failing me. My need for the drugs increased, so I turned to theft. I noticed an older man in my neighborhood who lived all alone in a rather luxurious townhouse. He seemed wealthy, kept to himself, and was usually away from home in the evening. So one night, while experiencing a violent wave of withdrawal, I risked breaking into his house. My plan was to steal anything I could sell. As soon as I stepped inside, I smelled a very strong chemical odor. Right as I paused, I jumped in fear because it felt like hundreds of eyes were staring directly at me in the dark. I stood frozen for a few seconds. When nothing happened, I slowly shined my flashlight around. I realized the entire house was filled with life-size dolls. I was startled, but the withdrawal pains were too intense for me to feel proper fear or care about the owner's eccentricity. I began rummaging through everything, searching for valuables, but the house contained nothing except for those dolls. Losing my patience as my cravings hit a breaking point, I started to snap. I began knocking over furniture and cursing. In a fit of rage, I swung my arm and shoved a doll that was sitting on a nearby armchair. When it hit the floor, my first thought was that it felt unusually heavy. It made a dull, solid thud against the ground, completely missing the hollow, brittle sound of plastic or foam. Immediately, an automated musical melody started playing from inside the doll. It sounded like a wooden music box, but the tune was strangely warped and distorted. I bent down and shined my flashlight closer. Because of the hard fall, the doll's head had snapped completely off the body. Right then, a disgusting stench, mixed with the heavy smell of chemicals, rushed up my nose, making me gag. What was sticking out from under the dress wasn't a plastic arm. It looked like shriveled, dried-up skin. My heart began to pound wildly. With a shaking hand, I moved the beam of light over to the head, lying right next to it. The wax mask on one side of the cheek had cracked open from the impact. Beneath that outer layer of wax, there was absolutely no plastic mold. It was a real human skull, covered in dried, stained scalp skin.
with two empty, deep black eye sockets staring straight back at me. It felt like a jolt of electricity surged through my brain. I was so stunned that I completely forgot about my withdrawal symptoms. I slowly panned my flashlight around, looking back at the dozens of dolls surrounding the house. I snapped completely out of my drug haze as I realized exactly what I was standing in the middle of. In a state of total panic, I dropped the flashlight, sprinted out the front door, and just kept running and vomiting frantically. I found a public payphone and called the police. For the next few days, I watched the news constantly, waiting for the results of the police investigation. Finally, the official details were released. Right after receiving my call, the police had searched the house and found a massive list of suspicious items, research files on hundreds of cemeteries, maps marking the locations of specific graves, digging tools, and plenty of documents proving the homeowner was grave robbing. The owner of the house was Professor Victor, a famous historian who had appeared on television and was highly respected as a model intellectual. But behind that image lay a horrific truth. The 29 dolls inside that house were not models at all. They were all real human beings that he had collected. It turned out that the evenings he was away from home were spent wandering around local cemeteries, digging up and stealing corpses. Just thinking about the fact that I used to walk past that house without knowing what was hidden inside sends a chill down my spine. The hundreds of eyes staring at me when I entered that house were actually real. It wasn't a hallucination caused by my addiction. After the investigation, the court concluded that Victor suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and truly believed his own distorted thoughts. They also determined he had no other deviant motives toward the bodies. However, that didn't make his actions any less horrifying. When he stood in court, Victor looked directly at the families of the victims and coldly stated, "You abandoned your daughters. I am the one who brought them back and kept them warm." That sentence made the entire courtroom go silent in shock. The families were filled with rage and agony, hearing the man who dug up their children's bodies speak such words. In the end, Victor was committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. As for me, after that horrific night, I was determined to get clean. That night made me realize that if I kept living that way, I would sooner or later die in some lonely corner or push myself into an even worse nightmare. I am Daniel, 40 years old. I came very close to death. It all started during a flight in June of this year. My brother Jacob and I were flying from Mumbai back to Manchester for our cousin's wedding. The flight took place in the morning. The weather was sunny and clear. I sat in seat 11A by the emergency exit. Jacob was next to me. Everything was normal as the plane taxied onto the runway. I even texted my wife that we were about to take off. No one thought that 30 seconds later, everything would fall apart. Right after the plane left the ground, I felt the engine stutter, as if it was choked. In the very next second, in a chilling moment of silence, the entire plane seemed to stall in midair. There was no engine sound, only the sound of breathing and a pounding heart in my ears. 5 seconds later, the left engine emitted a deafening explosion. My entire body was thrown forward out of the seat, then violently pulled back by the seatbelt, causing my chest to slam into the strap and my breath caught in my lungs. Everything in the cabin swayed in a fraction of a second. The cabin lights flashed erratically, green mixed with white, then went dark. A flight attendant screamed something, but before the sentence was finished, the plane plunged straight down. I saw Jacob's face turn to look at me, his eyes wide, his lips moving without a sound. Then everything exploded. The sound of twisting metal, shattering glass. Other passengers' screams merged with a terrifying crash. The plane had collided, as I later learned, with a medical student dormitory. The impact flung me to the right. My head slammed into the side of the plane, and my vision was a mix of red and black. A constant ringing noise filled my ears. The smell of burnt fuel and thick smoke was overwhelming. In that moment, I thought I was dead, but I don't know how long it was before I opened my eyes, and I was still breathing. My eyes were blurry from smoke and debris, but I could still see the hellish scene around me. Plane seats were shredded. Bent metal jutted out everywhere like giant blades.
bodies were scattered in various positions, blood pooling on the floor. My left arm wouldn't move. A searing pain ran from my shoulder down the entire left side of my body. My leg was trapped under the collapsed seat in front of me. I remembered and shouted Jacob's name, but there was only silence. I heard the distant sound of a fire truck siren. As I crawled out of the passenger compartment, I collapsed onto the shattered concrete of the building. A police officer ran over. He said something, but I couldn't hear clearly. All I could hear was a long ringing in my ears. I was put into an ambulance. What I remember next was the terrible pain. After receiving treatment, this is what I was left with. My shoulder was fractured in 2 places. My back had a spinal injury. My right kneecap was shattered. The left side of my body was partially paralyzed. I couldn't lift my left arm above my shoulder. I moved back to Buffalo for treatment, but the physical pain was followed by mental exhaustion and obsession. I lived in a closed room, refusing to see anyone. I didn't talk to my wife and children, though I once considered them my whole world. My 4-year-old son once asked, "Where does Daddy hurt?" But I couldn't answer. I could only sleep 3 to 4 hours each night. Nightmares always dragged me back to the moment the plane crashed, the screams, the sound of metal twisting. I always wore a Yankees baseball cap because it was Jacob's. He died right next to me. I became so negative that I once thought, God gave me life but took away all the happiness from me and my family. I couldn't work. The compensation from the airline hadn't been settled. My wife had to carry everything by working extra night shifts, and all I did was lie in a dark room and wonder why I was alive. I sought help from a psychiatrist. They called it survivor's guilt. It's considered a symptom within the PTSD group, post-traumatic stress disorder. The doctor suggested many methods, but they didn't help much. I have accepted the reality, but I haven't been able to escape it. Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of the passengers who flew with me that day. The man in the row behind, clutching his brown leather briefcase. The young woman with headphones, nodding to the rhythm of the music. The silver-haired woman holding a newspaper. They all perished. I don't know why I remember their faces so clearly, even though I only glanced at them once. Every night, I dream of them looking at me. Their eyes hold no resentment, but they repeatedly ask, "Why are you still alive?" 6 months after the accident, I stepped out of my room for the first time to face my wife and son. My wife was cooking dinner, and my son was playing with toy cars on the rug. The house was decorated with colorful Christmas decorations. My nose stung as I realized my son was a little taller. My wife looked much thinner. When they saw me, they both ran over, concerned. Then I realized the terrible thing I had done. I had isolated myself from my wife and son for 6 months, but they were still here, always waiting and loving me. Unlike the families of the other 279 people, they didn't get the chance to welcome their loved ones home. I began to take my treatment more seriously, trying every way to return to my former life. Although I know it will never be completely the same, I am writing this story to remind myself it was not my fault. I am incredibly lucky that I survived, and I must cherish that luck. I must live well, live for Jacob too. Yesterday, my son asked, "Daddy, does it still hurt?" "Yes, son, but I will be okay." The story is inspired by a real-life accident. In June 2025, a serious aviation tragedy occurred in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India, when an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying over 240 passengers and crew members en route to London, England, crashed just minutes after takeoff. The accident killed almost everyone on board, but miraculously, only one person survived. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, 40, a British national seated in seat 11A. Despite miraculously surviving what was considered a near-certain death, he suffered severe psychological trauma and was quickly transported to a civil hospital in India for treatment.
I am Howard, a late-night radio host in New Orleans. I host a show called Night Whispers on a local FM station. Every night, I take calls from people who need to talk. They are insomniacs, lonely souls, or people carrying big secrets. They talk about everything: painful divorces, strange dreams, or wild conspiracy theories. They can choose to tell me who they are or stay anonymous. I'm used to the chaos of the night, but I was not prepared for what happened that evening. The studio was small and completely soundproof. Only the dim blue light from the control panels lit the room. Outside, the city of New Orleans was asleep. It was just me and the steady hum of the radio waves. Around 1 in the morning, I received a call. The screen showed a blocked number. I picked up. "Welcome to Night Whispers. This is Howard." "Hello, Howard," a man's voice said. I guessed he was middle-aged. I thought he just needed to vent like everyone else. He called himself Clay. I was about to ask about his job or family, but Clay suddenly cut me off. His voice was flat and calm. "I have killed 12 sex workers." I froze. My hand stopped right over the volume knob. At first, I thought this was just a sick joke or a drug addict talking nonsense. I took a breath and prepared to hang up professionally, but Clay kept talking before I could say a word. "I killed the first one when I was only 16. I planned it in advance, and I have never been caught." My throat went dry. There was something about the stillness in his voice that made it impossible for me to hang up. "Are you being serious, Clay?" He began to describe how he operated. He said he usually found his victims in the New Orleans East area, where sex workers gathered. He didn't have to hunt. He would just park his car, turn on some music, and wait. He always chose women who looked weak and easy to manipulate. I tried to find a psychological motive, a reason to believe he was just a broken person. "Were you abused? Or was it your mother?" "No, Howard. Don't look for those cliché reasons," he laughed softly. It was a dry, hollow sound. "My mother was a wonderful woman. I didn't do it because of anyone else. I did it for the power. When you hold someone's life in your hands and they look at you with wide, pleading eyes, in that moment, you are God." A cold chill began to crawl down my spine. Every word Clay said pulled me deeper into a dark place. It shattered my calm exterior. He told me that sometimes he had made love with the victims before killing them. Sometimes. I didn't need a reason. I didn't even need to reach a climax. I just wanted to end someone. He then shared a disgusting detail about murdering a transgender person. After realizing the victim's gender, he intentionally placed money in a sensitive area of the body to mock them. "I always paid them, Howard. Even if they couldn't use it afterward, they deserved to get paid for their work." I stayed silent. All my skills for handling difficult callers were useless. Clay didn't seem to need me to say anything. He just needed a place to confess. He continued to fill the silence on his own. "Don't you think you'll eventually pay for what you've done?" "I'm very good at hiding," he answered. He said he once thought about leaving a signature for the police. He wanted to dip a victim's thumb in paint and press it onto the body like a piece of art, inspired by a comic book. But in the end, it felt like too much trouble, so I didn't. Then, Clay mentioned one final detail that gave me goosebumps. When the bodies were found, the police suspected an officer who had a history with one of the victims. The whole investigation went the wrong way. It's funny, isn't it? I knew that case. The newspapers had reported on an officer who was suspended because of that suspicion. The details Clay gave were too accurate and too realistic to be a joke. "So, why are you making this call and telling me everything?" Clay sighed. He answered, as if he were talking to himself. "I haven't done this for almost a year. At first, it was because my car broke down. But then I found that I could control myself." "Did you ever spare anyone?" Clay was silent for a moment. "Yes. A few of them looked too innocent." There was one girl who reminded me of my ex-fiancé. I felt bad for her and let her go. I didn't have time to ask anything else. Clay suddenly hung up. I sat motionless in the studio. The hum of the radio waves felt like insects buzzing in my head. I tried to finish the broadcast. I hosted the rest of the show like nothing had happened, but my hands were soaked with sweat. The next morning, I didn't call the police right away. It wasn't because I took the confession lightly. It was because I had no physical evidence other than a phone call that lasted less than 10 minutes. I had no name and no address. I only had a calm voice and a series of chilling details from a horrific story. To this day, I still haven't forgotten that steady voice. If what Clay said was true, then somewhere out there in the city of New Orleans, a serial killer is still living free. And that night, he chose me to lighten his burden. This story is based on a real event from 1995. A man calling himself Clay called the Howard Stern radio show and confessed to killing 12 sex workers in New Orleans. To this day, the true identity of Clay and the authenticity of the murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in radio history. My name is Michael Collins, and I live in Tampa, Florida. I hate Florida summers. The humid heat feels like a wet blanket wrapped around your body, making my apartment feel like an oven, even with the AC blasting at full power. That night, the night everything ended, was no different. I walked into the apartment after my shift at the Clearwater Casino. The faint smell of whiskey lingered in the air. Rebecca, the woman I'd lived with for 2 years, a nurse at Tampa General Hospital, had already started drinking before I got home. Our relationship wasn't love. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Both of us carried wounds from our pasts. I had my uncontrollable anger and the bottle of whiskey that never left my bedside. She had bruises left behind by old relationships and a deep, gnawing fear of being abandoned. Two broken people trying to form something whole, only to hurt each other more. 2 weeks earlier, drunk and angry, I shoved Rebecca into the wall. The impact knocked over the table lamp, shattering it. A piece of glass cut her arm, leaving a long scar. I apologized 1,000 times, swore it would never happen again. But Rebecca's eyes had already turned cold. Everything between us was dying. That evening, we sat on the couch drinking and watching some mindless TV show. My head was foggy from alcohol and exhaustion. My phone vibrated. It was Jack, my last real friend. I stepped out onto the balcony to answer. His voice was tense. He told me he'd seen Rebecca at a bar the night before. She had been extremely drunk and had hinted at threats, revenge, and some disturbing plans. Jack warned me to leave the apartment immediately, but I ignored him. I went back inside. Rebecca was sitting there with a strange smile on her lips. A large black suitcase was sitting in the middle of the floor. Rebecca introduced a game, a challenge. I was supposed to climb into the suitcase and see how long I could last before begging to be let out. In my drunken haze, it sounded like a weird, harmless dare. Why not? We'd done crazier things before. I remember the feeling of climbing inside that suitcase. At first, there was a childish thrill, like hiding in a secret cave. It was big enough for me to curl up in, knees pulled tight to my chest. Rebecca leaned over me, smiling softly. When I heard the zipper closing, I was still laughing. Darkness swallowed me, with only a sliver of light slipping through the seam. The cramped, humid space quickly filled with my own hot breath, sweat dripping down my back. The first few minutes passed quietly. I heard Rebecca moving around. She was getting more ice for her drink. I asked when she would let me out. No answer. I assumed she was messing with me. But after a few more minutes, I started feeling genuinely uneasy. The air felt thick, suffocating. The heat pressed in on me. Nausea rose in my throat. I told her to open it, Still no answer. Instead, I heard a quiet laugh and the click of a phone camera. Around minute 9 or 10, real fear seeped in. The suitcase suddenly felt less like a hiding spot and more like a coffin. Every breath felt harder. The air was disappearing. I began begging. That's when Rebecca finally spoke, her voice cold and distant. She said this was the lesson I deserved for everything I'd done to her. The bruises, the insults, the broken lamp, the late-night ER trip. I finally understood. This wasn't a game. I pounded on the walls of the suitcase, kicked, threw my weight at it, anything to break out. But the thick fabric held, and being curled in a helpless position meant I had no leverage. The noise I made wasn't loud enough, and our apartment was always noisy from our fights. No neighbor would find anything unusual. 20 minutes later, my body started to seize. Panic made my breathing faster, burning through what little oxygen I had left. My fingers went numb. My head spun. I didn't have the strength to pound anymore. I heard Rebecca turn on the TV, loud enough to drown out the faint sounds I was still making. She even talked to someone on the phone, her voice calm, casual, like nothing was happening. Time became distorted. My brain tried to recall how long a person could survive with no air. 3 minutes? 5? I heard Rebecca moving around the apartment, then silence. Did she go to bed? While I was suffocating a few feet away? My last breath was a soft exhale. Death wasn't as terrifying as I thought. It felt like slipping into sleep after an unbearably long day. The only difference was that I would never wake up again. Death wasn't the end of my story. No, only the middle chapter. I watched Rebecca the next morning as she woke up. Her eyes widened as she remembered. She walked toward the suitcase with hesitant steps and unzipped it with trembling hands. Her scream caught in her throat when she saw my twisted, blue, rigid body. After her panic subsided, a strange calm washed over her. Rebecca started planning, wiping fingerprints, deleting messages, preparing a story about a drunk hide-and-seek game gone wrong. She dialed 911 with a shaking, tearful voice. Detective Daniels was the first to question her version. He noticed the bruises on my body, but fate stepped in. Rebecca's phone. She had forgotten to delete the videos and photos she took of me inside the suitcase. The undeniable proof of an intentional killing. The trial began 6 months later. Rebecca wore a Navy suit, keeping up the facade of a tragic accident. But when the evidence was shown, her composure shattered. On the final day, Rebecca confessed. Not out of guilt, but as a legal strategy. She talked about our violent, toxic history, the wounds I had caused her. She claimed she just lost control. The jury didn't buy it. Rebecca Sloan was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. Looking back on my life, I see all the terrible choices that led me into that suitcase. The drinking, the rage, the violence, the toxic relationship I didn't have the courage to leave. I wasn't an innocent victim. I died in a suitcase, a coffin I chose long before I climbed into it. And the worst part is, a small part of me still wonders, would she have opened it if I begged harder? This story was inspired by a real case. In the Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres case, Jorge Torres was found dead inside a suitcase in Orange County, Florida. His girlfriend, Sarah Boone, 45, was taken into questioning. At first, Sarah couldn't explain Jorge's injuries, but later admitted their relationship involved mutual violence, including Jorge hitting her weeks earlier. A video found on Sarah's phone showed her next to the suitcase, while Jorge said he couldn't breathe. Sarah responded coldly and laughed. She claimed it was a drunken hide-and-seek game and that she fell asleep while he was inside. She faces second-degree murder charges, and could receive up to 16 years in prison if convicted.
I lived alone in a log cabin on the edge of the city. My husband died in a car crash. Our only son drowned 2 years later. When all the people I loved were gone, the only one left was Rocky, the male chimpanzee I had raised since he was 2 months old. For the past 14 years, Rocky had been my comfort, slowly helping my life stabilize again. I taught him basic activities like opening the refrigerator, watching television, and having afternoon tea with me. He had even appeared in a local juice commercial. His gentle face was printed on flyers all over the neighborhood. The neighbors were all familiar with seeing Rocky sitting in a chair on the front porch, waving at them like a friend. They came to Rocky's birthday party every year. We took commemorative photos together, and Rocky was called a special citizen of our neighborhood. One morning, I noticed something was wrong. Rocky refused to eat breakfast. He kept pacing back and forth in the living room, his eyes looking at me with a restless expression. He let out a low growl when I came near, then turned away again. I thought maybe Rocky was tired, so I made him a cup of licorice tea. Rocky usually loved this type of tea. I added the 2 tranquilizer pills that the vet had prescribed into the cup, hoping he would calm down. Rocky drank the tea completely, but he kept pacing, and his abnormal behavior seemed to be getting worse. Rocky repeatedly scratched his claws down the wooden floor, making a horrible screeching sound that gave me goosebumps. Closer to noon, I decided to call my best friend Jennifer for help. She had a master's degree in primate behavior from the University of California and had helped me train Rocky a few times before. Jennifer agreed and said she would come right away. While waiting for Jennifer, I stayed close to Rocky, rubbing his back and gently trying to reassure him. Rocky sat next to me but kept letting out low growls, his eyes constantly looking around very cautiously. About 20 minutes later, I heard a car stop in front of the house. Through the window, I saw Jennifer get out of her car, holding a bag with her examination tools. Rocky was sitting on the sofa, but when he heard the noise, he shot up, his head tilted toward the door. I went to open the door before Jennifer could ring the bell. She smiled at me, but the smile froze. But only 3 seconds later, Jennifer's scream tore through the quiet midday air. Rocky lunged at her face with both hands, his claws digging deep into her skin. Blood splattered onto the doorstep, the white wall, and even onto my shirt. Jennifer fell backward onto the ground, struggling to push Rocky away. But she couldn't stop the chimpanzee's strength, which was 5 times that of an adult human. His teeth bit into her cheek, ripping off a large chunk of flesh. Jennifer's cries grew fainter, turning into moans of pain. I stood frozen for a few more seconds. I saw every horrifying detail clearly. Jennifer's eyes looking at me full of despair, and Rocky's growl directed toward me. He was completely foreign. He wasn't the chimpanzee I had cared for over the past 14 years. Jennifer's next cry for help jolted me awake. I ran to the back of the house, grabbed the shovel next to the back door, rushed back out, and hit Rocky hard across the back. He only turned to look at me once before continuing to bite and tear at Jennifer. I dropped the shovel again and ran inside to call 911. When the woman's voice came through on the other end of the line, I immediately screamed. "He's eating my friend! Please, hurry up and get here!" "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "He's eating my friend! Please, hurry up and get here!" About 10 minutes later, the sound of police sirens arrived. 2 police officers jumped out of the patrol car, drawing their guns when they saw the scene in front of them. Jennifer was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Rocky was still focused entirely on her. When he heard the footsteps, Rocky turned his head, his mouth still covered in blood. Then he suddenly charged straight toward them. I heard one officer yell, "Shoot him!" Immediately, 3 gunshots rang out in quick succession. Rocky still stumbled forward a few more feet before collapsing, convulsing a few times, and then lying still. When I turned back, Jennifer was being loaded into an ambulance. A few paramedics checked my health, and the police started questioning me. I sat on the porch steps, watching people cover Rocky's body with a blue tarp. The blood had dried on my hands. I didn't cry because my emotion then was just emptiness. It felt very similar to the feeling I had when I lost my husband and son. After I finished cooperating with the police investigation, the first thing I did was go to the hospital to see Jennifer. Jennifer survived, like a miracle, but her entire face was ruined. Seeing my best friend lying motionless, her head heavily bandaged, I almost fainted. 6 months passed. Jennifer has undergone 12 facial reconstruction surgeries. As for me, I have suffered from constant insomnia and severe depression. I completely fell apart from losing Rocky and feeling guilty about Jennifer. I was wrong to believe that I could love, care for, and change Rocky. That I could make Rocky a part of the family and make him forget his wild nature. But Rocky wasn't my child, and I didn't have the right to force him to live like a human. My biggest mistake wasn't raising Rocky, but forgetting that love can't change everything, especially instinct. If you are listening to my story and think that enough love is all it takes to erase the line between human and nature, please remember Jennifer. I regret and torment myself endlessly for what she had to endure, all because of my blindness.
My name is Daniel. I just got back from the police station, closing the chapter on the most horrifying event of my life. But it's only a legal ending. The memories will haunt me for as long as I live. Everything started 4 years ago. After being single for a long time, I downloaded Tinder. Before long, I met a girl named Amber. We hit it off immediately. Amber was smart and shared almost the same taste in everything as me. After only 2 weeks of dating, Amber suddenly suggested that we move in together to take our relationship to the next level. I was shocked by how pushy she was. Even though I liked her, I felt things were moving way too fast. I had a vague, uneasy gut feeling, so I decided to turn her down and end the relationship right then and there. Amber didn't accept it. She lost her mind. For the next month, I was bombarded with desperate texts, missed calls in the middle of the night, and emails of her sobbing and begging me to come back. Her stalking only made me more certain that leaving her was the right choice. Then, suddenly, Amber went completely silent. I figured she had finally found a new target. About a month later, I went to my high school reunion and ran into my ex-girlfriend, Lily. We had broken up on good terms years ago, so reconnecting felt very natural. The mix of familiarity and new sparks made me fall in love with Lily all over again. But the happiness didn't last long. Shortly after I got back together with Lily, the real nightmare began. I started getting texts from an unknown number. The messages were incredibly sick. "You're making a mistake," and "You're going to pay for this." I tried calling back, but the line was always disconnected. Lily started getting the same threatening messages too. She was terrified, crying all the time, and wouldn't leave my side. I began to suspect that Amber was behind it. The texting style was almost identical to the desperate emails she had sent me before. Things escalated until one night. Lily called me in a total state of panic. Her house was engulfed in flames. Luckily, Lily made it out just in time. She told me she thought she heard someone inside earlier, but she was sleepy and ignored it. It was very likely that an intruder had broken in and set the fire. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence or footprints because the security cameras in the area were broken. Right after the fire, I got an anonymous text. "I warned you!" At that point, I completely broke down. I felt like a monster for dragging Lily into the crosshairs of a lunatic like Amber. To keep Lily safe, I made the painful decision to break up with her. When I told her we had to end it, Lily was silent and stared at me for a long time. Then, she simply nodded and agreed. No arguing, no begging. After I broke up with Lily, the harassment faded away and eventually stopped altogether. I heard Lily moved on with someone new and settled down. I believed Amber had finally gotten what she wanted and was leaving me alone. I had almost forgotten the whole thing until one morning when the police knocked on my door. They wanted me to help with an investigation into Amber's death. I was stunned to hear she had been dead for a long time. The next piece of information from the police was even more shocking. The killer was Lily. It turned out that after our first breakup years ago, Lily never actually let me go. She had been secretly stalking me for a long time. Seeing me date Amber was the spark that triggered Lily's hidden dark personality. That crazy woman had planned a way to get close to Amber and murdered her right after our very last date. Then, she took Amber's phone and used it to pretend Amber was still alive, sending those terrifying texts to me and even to herself. The house fire started to make sense too. The police couldn't prove it then, but looking back, I realized it was all a calculated plan by Lily to point all my suspicion toward Amber. The plan was so perfect that if Amber's mother hadn't been so persistent about reporting her daughter missing and noticing strange patterns in her daughter's texting style over the years, the truth might have stayed buried forever. Lily was arrested immediately. When I saw the photo of her in handcuffs in the newspaper, I shivered. I realized the woman I wanted to protect, the woman I thought was a victim, was actually a cold-blooded killer who lived with that secret for years just to own me.
This story is inspired by a true case. The case of Carrie Farver began in 2012 when she vanished after dating a man named Dave Krupa for 2 weeks. Dave and his ex-girlfriend Shanna received thousands of threats from Carrie's accounts for years. Police originally thought Carrie just ran away, but later discovered Shanna killed Carrie out of jealousy and spent years impersonating the victim to manipulate Dave. Shanna was sentenced to life in prison in 2017, though Carrie's body was never found.
I have never told this story to anyone. It is a scar that runs too deep, a secret I have spent my entire adult life trying to bury. I was 19 years old back then. At that age, I was filled with an extreme sense of rebellion. I hated the constraints of my family and wanted to break every rule. That was when I met Peter. Peter wasn't like anyone I had ever known. He lived recklessly, freely, and intensely. With him, I felt like I could truly be myself without being judged or forced to change. So I ran away from home to be with him. We survived by shoplifting from convenience stores and small grocery marts. I learned street skills from Peter. He was also the one who introduced me to drugs. We leaned on each other, just drifting through life like ghosts. Disaster struck when Peter was caught during a theft. He was sentenced to 3 months in a local jail, while I was lucky enough to only be put on probation. During those 3 months, I lived alone, struggling through the agonizing pain of withdrawal and missing him like crazy. I had no idea that while he was locked up, Peter was forced to get completely clean. It was a requirement of the jail, and he was actually sober by the time his release date approached. The day Peter was released, I was so happy I felt like I was losing my mind. I had a gift ready to welcome him back, a $10 bag of heroin. The moment we met outside the jail gates, we threw our arms around each other in pure joy. We hurried into a quiet, secluded alleyway, hidden from everyone's sight. I pulled out the gift. Peter looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes. But in the end, his old addiction and his desire to please me won. We used the drugs together. I had missed that floating sensation and the way the world spins for 3 long months. Eventually, we drifted off into a deep sleep in each other's arms. I don't remember much of what happened next. My memory is a blurred mess of being conscious and being blacked out. The only thing I felt clearly was Peter beside me. I felt completely safe and at peace. At one point, I felt Peter fidgeting as if he wanted to leave or get up. But because I wanted to keep him in my arms, I grabbed his sleeve and pulled him closer, hugging him as tight as I could. When I finally woke up, the sun was starting to come up. A few seconds after I cleared my head, I realized something was wrong. Peter's body in my arms was ice cold, and his skin was a bruised, purplish color. I tried to convince myself he was just in a very deep sleep, but when I touched his chest, there was no heartbeat. I froze for a few seconds before total panic set in, and then I scrambled up, screaming his name over and over. No matter how hard I shook him or how loud I yelled, Peter didn't wake up. Then, terror hit me as I realized I was sitting next to a corpse. In a moment of total panic, I did the most cowardly thing of my life. I ran. I bolted out of that alley, leaving his body lying there among the trash. Later that afternoon, I overheard some homeless people talking about a man's body found in the alley. The police concluded it was a typical overdose death of a wandering addict. There was no big investigation, and no one came looking for me. Given Peter's situation, I knew they just saw it as another typical death of a young addict and didn't look into it further. Even though I wasn't prosecuted, the haunting in my mind is 1,000 times worse than jail. I realized that when Peter was fidgeting that night, he wasn't trying to leave me. He was reaching out for help. He was desperately searching for a way to survive while I, blinded by my own selfishness and the drugs, held him tight, accidentally choking off his last chance at life. I had slept soundly on top of the cooling body of the person I loved most.
My name is Rachel.
15 years ago, after going through 2 unhappy marriages and having no children of my own, I adopted a baby boy named Joe. I was always so proud of him. I felt lucky to raise such a good kid. He was thoughtful, did well in school, and was remarkably handsome. Since I didn't have a partner, I had to work extra hard to provide for the 2 of us. I worked 2 jobs at the same time. I always tried to organize my life perfectly so I could still spend plenty of quality time with Joe. I used to think I understood him completely, but I was wrong. Because of his personality and his looks, Joe had a lot of girls interested in him by his sophomore year of high school. He was very open about his dating life and shared stories with me often. I was very easygoing about it and happy that he felt comfortable telling me everything. Eventually, Joe started asking to bring girls over to the house. Sometimes, these girls would ask to sleep over, claiming they were studying late or that their parents couldn't pick them up. I agreed to let them stay. Because of my second job, I usually got home late, so I didn't interfere much. I just reminded the kids to behave responsibly. However, after about a semester, I started to feel uneasy. The number of girls Joe brought home kept increasing. I realized I almost never saw the same girl a second time. At the time, I just assumed he was a typical teenager who caught feelings fast and lost interest even faster. One morning on my way to work, I happened to see a missing person flyer taped to a utility pole near a store. The face of the girl on the flyer made me stop in my tracks. She looked incredibly familiar. If I wasn't mistaken, she was one of Joe's former girlfriends. I planned to ask him about it when I got home, but I ended up forgetting. Over the next few days, more flyers appeared. All the girls were around Joe's age, and they were wearing the familiar uniforms of the high school he attended. I asked Joe about it. I was curious because he usually talked a lot about school, but he hadn't mentioned this at all. Joe just gave a cold smile and said he didn't like sharing sad news. He asked me to stop bringing it up. I thought a lot about his attitude and that specific comment. My mother's intuition told me something was very wrong, and I decided to keep a closer eye on my son. I secretly changed my work schedule. I started coming home 2 hours early from each job, making the excuse that I was tired and needed more rest. In reality, I was quietly observing Joe. And a mother's gut feeling is never wrong. Joe started going out late at night, claiming he was taking a walk or meeting a friend. He kept his phone with him at all times and changed his password constantly. Some nights, he would come home very late and immediately start a load of laundry in the middle of the night. One day when Joe wasn't home, I snuck into his room to check around. The room was clean and organized, just like always. But while looking through his notebooks and papers, I found a stack of papers hidden deep under a pile of documents. When I pulled them out, I was horrified. They were all the missing person flyers for the high school girls who had disappeared over the past few months. On each flyer, there were handwritten notes. They were judgmental comments like, "Too noisy," "Can't keep a secret," or "Too demanding." The handwriting undeniably belonged to my son. What I read next in Joe's diary was truly nightmare-inducing. Entry 1. She was noisier than I thought. The screaming was so annoying. Entry 2. Getting better. Being more forceful is definitely the best method. Entry 3. Perfect. Keep doing it this way. All of these notes, combined with the strange behavior I had seen over the past few days, led me to one single terrifying conclusion. Joe was the killer. I stood there frozen for a long time. I asked myself if this was really the sweet boy I had raised for 15 years. It has been almost a week since I read those words. I am constantly in a state of panic and fear. I have thought about calling the police, but if my suspicions are true, I don't know how I could face the reality of it. Then I try to tell myself it's all a big misunderstanding and that I'm just overthinking things. I can't act natural around Joe anymore. The more I look at his familiar face, the more like a stranger he becomes. During dinner tonight, Joe suddenly looked directly at me. His gaze made me shiver. He stared deep into my eyes as if he were searching for something. Then Joe gave a slight smile and asked, "You've been acting different lately, Mom." It's almost like you found out a secret, isn't it?
My name is Lacey. I am the only daughter of the Whitmore family, the wealthiest lineage in this region for 4 generations. We live in a massive estate with dozens of full-time staff members. My father was Edward Whitmore. He was a man who controlled everything. Every small detail of the house, every business move, and especially me. I never felt like I was allowed to be my own person. Growing up under his thumb created a strange mix of frustration and arrogance inside of me. Then, one night, my father suddenly passed away. It was 3 a.m, right in the primary bedroom he shared with my mother. The doctor concluded it was a sudden heart attack. My father was over 60 and under immense pressure running the company, so he had been warned about his heart health many times. When they carried his body out, I froze at the sight of his face. His mouth was hanging wide open, and his eyes were bugged out in total panic. He didn't look like someone who had died in pain. He looked like someone who had died of pure terror. My mother couldn't accept the doctor's conclusion. She spiraled into a breakdown after the funeral. It wasn't just grief, though. She became mentally unstable. She insisted that something, or someone, had killed my father. She claimed that something stood at the foot of her bed every single night. Even though she couldn't see a face, she said she could feel a cold, hateful gaze staring back at her. During the day, she was distracted and slow to react, jumping at the slightest noise. She checked the bedroom door locks constantly and demanded the servants bolt every single window before sunset. Then the screaming started. Around 2 a.m., she would scream that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to take her life. The staff and I were exhausted, I suggested she see a psychiatrist many times, but she always shot me down. She insisted she was perfectly sane and that she was the only one alert enough to notice the threat. She refused to listen to any other explanation. A month after my father died, my mother secretly contacted a medium from the next town over. At the same time, she quietly positioned 4 of her most trusted staff members to hide in the hallway. I only found out about this after the trap was already set, so I just shrugged it off. I went to my room and went to sleep like usual, leaving her to her paranoia. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I was jolted awake by a chaotic noise coming from the end of the hall. I heard my mother's piercing scream, heavy thudding footsteps, and the sound of a door being kicked open. I bolted out of bed and ran toward the noise. When I got there, the lights in my parents' suite were blindingly bright. The door was wide open, and the 4 staff members were pinning a man down in the center of the room. He was fighting like a wild animal, trying to break free and reach the open window. Within seconds, the men slammed him into the floor and forced his arms behind his back. I stepped closer and gasped when I saw his face. It was Daniel, the gardener. Daniel was about 30 years old. I didn't even know how long he had worked for us. I had only interacted with him once, but it was an encounter that made his face impossible to forget. I had been driving home in a foul mood after a tense meeting with my father's partners. Daniel was standing near the side gate, blocking the entrance. He told me he was planting new flowers and asked me to use the main gate instead. I lost my temper instantly. I couldn't believe a servant was telling me what to do. I drove straight forward, crushing every single flower bed he had worked on, and barked at him to replant them all. Daniel didn't say a word. He just watched my car pull away with a look that I was too arrogant to care about at the time. It wasn't until everything came to light that night that I finally understood the meaning of that look. It turned out Daniel was my father's illegitimate son. My father had abandoned Daniel's mother before he was even born. Daniel grew up in poverty, his hatred growing alongside him. When his mother died, he began his plan for revenge. He got a job as our gardener to learn our schedules and movements. For months, he had been slipping into my father's room at night. He didn't use weapons or threats. He simply stood there, destroying their mental health through pure psychological torment. His plan was halfway successful. My father's heart gave out from the stress, but my mother survived. It was her stubborn intuition and her refusal to be ignored that finally exposed him. The police hauled Daniel away in handcuffs that night. A heavy, somber mood settled over the villa. My mother sat in silence. She didn't cry, and she didn't say a word. Her eyes were no longer panicked, but they weren't relieved either. As for me, I realized the only thing I could say was, "I'm sorry." I hadn't believed her. I chose to stay out of it, viewing her fear as nothing more than weakness or grief. I had even felt by her screams. My father had planted the seeds of this hatred long ago. Daniel spent his whole life nurturing it, and I, in my blind arrogance, was the one who finally made it bloom. My name is Mark, and my wife Evelyn and I just moved into a new house in Milwaukee. Everything was going as smoothly as we could have hoped for. After everything we had been through lately, we were both praying this place would be the fresh start we needed. However, Evelyn didn't feel completely at home. She started suffering from insomnia. Soon after, she began waking up in the middle of the night with a start, bolting upright and staring intensely into the corner of the room. Evelyn insisted there was something in the house watching us. I didn't believe her. I figured it was just a psychological reaction to moving into an unfamiliar environment. Then, Evelyn started talking about the basement. She claimed that every night she heard a very faint sound coming from down there, like something lightly scratching at the floorboards. I went down to check several times. I looked into every dark corner, but I never found anything out of the ordinary. There were no signs of mice or any disturbed dust. I started to get annoyed having to do it over and over, while Evelyn became more certain that something was living beneath us. One night, I was fast asleep when I woke up to the sensation of the bed shaking violently. It wasn't a tremor, it was a series of sharp, rhythmic jerks. I turned over and saw Evelyn struggling under the blankets, gasping for air. Her hands were flailing as if she were trying to push an invisible weight off her chest. I jumped up, grabbed her by the shoulders, and called her name repeatedly. It took several seconds before her eyes snapped open, looking at me with pure terror. Evelyn told me she had just seen a vision of a woman being buried alive. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a vivid nightmare brought on by stress. But Evelyn wouldn't drop it. She shifted from fear to a strange obsession, constantly muttering that it is waiting for the ritual to be completed. Her condition worsened by the day. During the afternoon, she was spaced out, sometimes standing perfectly still as if she were listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. At night, she didn't sleep at all. I started thinking about taking her to see a doctor, but she firmly refused. Evelyn told me she wanted to invite a medium to the house. Feeling helpless, I let her decide, thinking that if it made her feel better, it was worth a try. The session took place in the evening. We dimmed the lights, and the air in the room quickly grew heavy and thick. The medium sat across from Evelyn and began the ritual by whispering strange, unintelligible words. After only a few seconds, Evelyn suddenly bolted upright. She sprinted out of the room, heading straight for the basement stairs. I chased after her immediately. By the time I got downstairs, Evelyn was standing in the center of the basement floor, her eyes completely blank. I called her name, but she didn't react. When she finally spoke, I gasped. The voice coming out of her mouth wasn't hers at all. "Dig it up," she commanded, pointing directly at the concrete floor. I don't know why, but her absolute certainty made it impossible for me to say no. I grabbed some tools and started breaking through the floor exactly where she pointed. After a while, my shovel hit something solid. I cleared away the dirt around it, and the shape slowly emerged. A long wooden box, looking very much like a homemade coffin, buried deep under the foundation. When I pried the lid open, I was horrified to find a human skeleton inside, lying perfectly straight and composed. The medium stood behind me and gasped in shock. "This spirit doesn't hold a grudge," she whispered. "It's not here for revenge. It's just trapped." At that moment, Evelyn, or whatever was speaking through her, began uttering fragmented, disjointed words. The medium communicated with the entity for a moment before giving us a clear explanation. The spirit was a woman. She hadn't died by suicide or murder. She had voluntarily climbed into that box. As a member of an extremist cult, she believed that by burying herself alive, her soul would leave her body and be reborn on a different plane of existence. But the ritual had failed. Her body died, but her soul was never able to fully depart. The spirit didn't want to hurt Evelyn. It reached out to her because Evelyn was a believer in the afterlife. That belief made her the perfect vessel for the spirit to communicate its plight. The air in the basement suddenly turned ice cold. The medium worked quickly to close the ritual, and Evelyn collapsed into my arms. We handed the remains over to the police, and even performed a small blessing ceremony to help the soul find peace. Evelyn slowly returned to her normal self. But even now, she says the feeling of being called hasn't entirely faded. As for me, I realized that some things I used to think didn't exist are simply things I hadn't been forced to face yet. After many years working in the funeral business, I've handled hundreds of funerals. People on the outside think my job is about death, but it isn't. It's about the living. I listen, guide, and do everything I can to help families say their final goodbye to someone they love. I've been doing this for 15 years. Everything tends to follow the same calm, steady rhythm. But the Harper family was an exception. Michael Harper, 22 years old, drowned while fishing at his family's cabin by the lake. According to the report, Harper was alone when the accident happened. His mother was the one who discovered the situation. Cause of death was ruled as a capsized boat. The body was recovered 2 days later. We got the call on Thursday evening. When I saw the condition of the remains, I had to strongly recommend a closed casket. Water does terrible things to a body, especially after drifting in it for 2 nights. Mrs. Harper came into the office to complete the paperwork. She wore a plain gray coat, hands clasped together, her expression unreadable. She sat down, staring straight ahead, and before I could even offer my condolences, she spoke. "Closed casket. Don't open it, and don't ask." I assured her we would respect the family's wishes completely, but then she said something that made me freeze. "He's not really in there, you know." I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't show the kind of grief I was used to seeing. She told me that ever since the night her son drowned, he had been coming home every night at exactly 3 a.m. She insisted it wasn't a dream or a hallucination, but the truth. "He comes in through the back door, soaking wet, dripping water just like when they pulled him out of the lake." At first, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Grief often makes people say strange things. I started noticing puddles, hearing footsteps, the stairs creaking. I used to get up to check, thinking I was losing my mind. But then I saw him standing in the hallway, half of him swallowed by the shadows. His clothes stuck to his body, his head tilted, just staring at me without saying a word. She told the story without a trace of emotion, and without trying to convince me it was real. When she handed me the photo for the obituary, I noticed her hands didn't even shake. In the picture, Michael was smiling brightly, holding a fishing rod, barefoot on a boat. We proceeded with the arrangements. Mrs. Harper didn't want flowers, didn't want a long ceremony, just enough for the family to gather. The casket was closed, but not because the body was in terrible condition, as I had suggested. The truth was exactly what she claimed. It was completely empty. Only a handful of people attended the service. Mrs. Harper sat in the back row, never once looking up, never looking toward the casket. Her eyes stayed fixed on the entrance door, as if she were waiting for someone. When the service ended and people quietly left, she walked up to me and said, "I have to do this, so others will think he's gone." Then she looked up at me, her face still blank. "But I still see him. I still hear the water dripping onto the floor." We buried the casket 2 days after the funeral. Mrs. Harper didn't stay. She sat in her car with the engine running and drove away before the last shovel of dirt was placed. I thought I'd never see her again. But a few months later, a colleague from another town told me about a woman who came in to arrange her own funeral before she passed. That woman requested that her casket be screwed shut, tightly. Not only that, she insisted it be reinforced with locks. When they asked her why, she answered in the same cold, calm tone. "Because when I die, I don't want to come back soaking wet."